You know how some people say your in-laws can feel like an extension of your spouse, like a package deal? Well, if that's true, I found myself stuck with a pretty hefty shipping fee. My husband, Daniel, comes from a tight-knit family that abides by a tradition they've held for generations. Every Thanksgiving, they gather at his parents' home, all 25 of them crammed in like sardines, to whip up a homemade feast, complete with a turkey so large it could probably feed a small village. I used to love this chaotic spectacle when I first joined the family, but as the years went by, it felt less like a holiday and more like a pressure cooker. This year, I was at my wit's end. I had just finished a grueling work project that left me drained, my mind buzzed incessantly, and my anxiety clawed at my chest. The thought of spending an entire day amidst so many expectations made my stomach twist in knots. So, I had what I thought was a reasonable idea: let's skip the family Thanksgiving and celebrate just the two of us, a quiet dinner at home. I felt like I was offering a breath of fresh air, like we could actually connect without the cacophony of our extended family's loud conversations and constant interruptions. But when I brought it up to Daniel, you would have thought I'd suggested we cancel Christmas. His face fell, and within seconds, the warmth in his eyes vanished. "It's tradition," he said, his voice steady but edged with disappointment, as if I were trying to rob him of an important piece of his childhood. I could feel my heart sinking with each word, and the battle within me escalated. I knew how much this meant to him, a way to feel connected to his past, to his roots, but didn't my well-being come into play too? The days dragged on as I tried to convince myself that I wasn't being selfish. My phone buzzed with messages from his family, excited invitations layered with mouth-watering food photos. "We can't wait to see you," they enthused. Meanwhile, I sat alone in my thoughts, unnerved by the fact that my choice felt like a tug-of-war in my marriage. One night, I climbed into bed feeling a mixture of guilt and fervor. "Are you seriously not going to support me in this?" I confronted him, desperately searching for understanding. "You know how stressed I am." But the conversation only spiraled, and by the time we went to sleep, we hadn't resolved anything, drifting into our restless slumber with the weight of unsaid words pressing down on us. The morning of Thanksgiving arrived, and I found myself standing in our kitchen alone, staring down at a measly chicken breast and a box of stuffing I had half-heartedly set out, a stark contrast to any festive spread. I closed my eyes, trying to summon some sense of joy, but all I could see was Daniel in his parents' living room, laughing with everyone around him, while I'd sit here, the outlier. Was it really fair of me to take that away from him? But as I reached for the phone to send a last-minute text to his family, something made me pause. What if this was my chance to define our own traditions, to take ownership of our new family? So I decided right then and there, with the scent of "why can't I cook" wafting around me, to embrace the day ahead as it came. It wouldn't be what I'd envisioned, but it would be ours. Instead of spending the day sulking, I pulled on my apron, put on some music, and danced around the kitchen as if no one was watching. When Daniel returned home later that evening, looking a bit deflated but relieved, I greeted him with a plate of warmly roasted vegetables and a smile that masked my earlier worries. "I missed you," I said softly. And in the end, I realized traditions don't have to be rigid, they could bend and shift, just like the seasons. We may have skipped the family gathering, but maybe we were crafting our own new tradition, one rooted in understanding, love, and a whole lot of experimenting in the kitchen. Who knows, perhaps next year we'd figure out a way to combine both worlds. It felt like starting fresh, just the two of us. Update: it's been a few months since the Thanksgiving. Daniel and I talked things over, and he admitted he felt pressured to uphold traditions that sometimes felt more like burdens. We now have a mutual understanding to take turns with holidays, one year at home, the next with family. And honestly, I think adapting our own tradition ignited a renewed spark in our marriage. Turns out, cooking together isn't just an activity, it's our own rite of passage. As we settled into this new rhythm, the upcoming holiday season brought with it a sense of excitement that had been absent before. I could hardly wait to turn our small apartment into a cozy haven, filled with the scent of cinnamon and the sound of soft carols drifting through the air. It was our year to celebrate together, just the two of us, and I embraced the chance wholeheartedly. I spent days researching recipes that felt both festive and a little unique, like a spiced pear tart that I thought would be a surprise hit and an adventurous twist on mashed potatoes with garlic and herbs. Daniel was on board, which was a relief. He'd offered to take care of the turkey, turning our kitchen into a blend of his family's traditional preparation and my less conventional tweaks. The night before Thanksgiving, we went grocery shopping together. Our cart filled with fresh ingredients and maybe too many snacks. We even put on our own little competition to see who could make the most ridiculous culinary choice. I ended up with a bag of enormous marshmallows that I had no idea what to do with. "We can roast them on the fire pit," Daniel laughed, tossing them into the cart. It felt like we were kids again, exploring rather than just preparing. We headed home, and as the evening wound down, I could feel the warmth of the holiday wrapping around us. The next morning, as dawn painted our kitchen in soft golden light, we turned on our favorite music and commenced the cooking marathon. I can still picture Daniel, apron slightly askew, carefully basting the turkey while I danced around with my baking dish. He had such a focused determination, and I smiled to myself, thinking how much I loved this version of him, the one who made our holiday tradition his own, just as I was shifting mine. We set the table with the care of artists preparing a masterpiece. I lined our modest dining table with a simple white tablecloth, and we adorned it with candles and a small bouquet of autumn leaves. Each detail felt like a stitch in the fabric of our new tradition. But as we filled our plates with the food we had cooked together, a part of me remained anxious. What would my family think in just a few days when they came over for dessert? Would they accept this new direction we had taken? When my family arrived later that weekend, I poured all my nervous energy into being the perfect hostess, hoping that they would see the love beneath the different setup. Thankfully, they stepped in with warm hugs and familiar laughter that made my heart swell, easing the tension I had felt brewing at the back of my mind. I could see Daniel engaging with my family, joking about the turkey and exchanging culinary tips, and for a moment, I felt a rush of relief and excitement. Yet, as dessert time approached, my mom, hopeful as ever, leaned closer to me and said, "So, next year, we'll be back to the usual, right?" The question took me off guard, and I felt my stomach drop slightly. As I glanced at Daniel, who seemed equally uncomfortable, I realized I had to say something. "Actually, Mom, Daniel and I are hoping to keep alternating traditions each year. This is a new start for us, and we'd love your support," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. There was a moment of silence, and my heart raced. I worried how my family would react, especially my mom, who cherished the comfort of our old ways. But instead, she nodded slowly, a thoughtful expression creeping onto her face. "I see. Well, that's wonderful, too. Traditions can change, but family stays the same." That felt like a turning point. It was like suddenly everything felt lighter. We spent the rest of the evening sharing tales of our own childhood holiday experiences. Daniel opened up about his sometimes overwhelming family traditions, and I shared my quirky childhood dishes. The thought that hit me was how our stories were powerful bridges, perfect for building new family traditions. As I lay in bed that night, with Daniel beside me, I reflected on the day. It wasn't just about the food or the holiday, it was about how sharing our worlds led to something richer. Together, we had transformed our uncertainties into laughter and warmth in a way I never thought possible. Fast forward a few weeks, while the world outside still breathed the remnants of autumn, our little home thrummed with the spirit of our own unique traditions, one dish at a time. Daniel and I started brainstorming even more ideas for the upcoming holiday season, asking each other about childhood memories and the experiences that defined us. It felt like we had a new plotline to explore in the story of our marriage, a blend of the old and the new where love was the consistent thread. This year, instead of a simple update, it felt more like a testament. Sometimes stepping away from tradition isn't stepping away from family. It's merely a beautiful way of welcoming them along for the ride into something fresh. Together, we forged ahead, ready to keep crafting our own path with all the warmth and resilience our hearts could muster. This was not just about a holiday, it was a celebration of us, and I couldn't wait for what was to come. As the leaves turned golden and the air began to carry the crisp bite of autumn, I could feel the excitement bubbling in my chest, a mixture of anticipation and a wee bit of nervousness. It was almost time for us to host our first Thanksgiving in our new tradition, the opportunity to showcase our blend of cultures and backgrounds with our closest friends and family. Daniel and I had charted out a whole new experience, merging his family's classic recipes with my own quirks. We developed a menu that made my mouth water just thinking about it: sweet potato casserole with a dash of cinnamon and a sprinkle of maple syrup, my mother's famous stuffing enriched with a touch of sage, and of course, his family's roast turkey, but I snuck in a smoky paprika twist. The kitchen was alive with the sound of sizzling pans and laughter as we rummaged through old family cookbooks and presented dishes to each other like treasured gifts. Each spoonful of gravy, every pie crust we wrestled with, became a symbol of our partnership. I remember the way Daniel would toss his head back with laughter, a hint of flour dusting his nose every time I challenged him on the proper way to fold in the whipped cream. Those little moments became our unbreakable thread, a tapestry of memories woven with joy, frustration, and affection. As Thanksgiving approached, however, I couldn't shake a lingering anxiety about how everyone would respond. Would my parents take to his family's traditions? Would his relatives embrace the deviations from the norm? The night before the big day, I found myself lying awake, staring at the ceiling, mulling over my feelings as the weight of expectation settled upon my chest. It was more than just any family gathering, it was holding the potential for either acceptance or pushback. When the big day finally arrived, the air was thick with the smell of roasted turkey and fresh herbs, a heady mix that seemed to wrap around us like a warm embrace. Our small home was filled with love and laughter as guests trickled in, greeting each other with hugs and excited chatter. I caught momentary glances of worry on my parents' faces, but when I saw Daniel's Aunt Linda laughing heartily at a joke my dad had told, my heart eased slightly. Dinner was a beautiful disaster. Just as we all sat down to eat, the turkey, in all its glory, let loose a spray of juices, making Daniel and me erupt in giggles while our guests shot us amused glances. My mom offered a spoonful of real gravy while Daniel proudly served his paprika gravy, and I watched, holding my breath for the first bite. The moment felt electric. Much to my surprise, the two gravies aged like fine wine, drawing compliments from all corners of the table. Mixed conversations flowed over platters filled with vibrant colors, a mosaic of flavors that told stories of our families and their histories. As I watched my parents invest in Daniel's family's tales and traditions, my heart swelled. There we sat, weaving the old and the new into something that belonged to all of us, intertwined in understanding and affection rather than obligation. By the time dessert rolled around, I felt different, lighter, more alive. I looked across the table at Daniel, who caught my gaze and smiled, his eyes twinkling with a blend of pride and amusement at the embarrassing mishaps of the day. The evening ended with us all clinking our glasses, a chorus of gratitude ringing out as we celebrated not only the food but the promise of togetherness. The echo of laughter settled like a warm quilt draped over our shoulders, enfolding us in a newfound appreciation for life, each of us, together. As our guests began to leave, I joined Daniel by the door, quietly savoring the moment. It dawned on me that stepping away from rigid traditions opened doors I never knew existed. It wasn't about rejecting the past, it was about embracing possibilities, finding fresh beginnings even in the heart of cherished history. That night felt like more than just a holiday dinner, it was a collection of little miracles, each one reminding me that families can indeed forge ahead, carving paths anew while carrying legacies along for the ride. As we cleaned up together, Daniel leaned against the counter, a satisfied grin on his face. "Maybe Thanksgiving doesn't have to fit into a box," he said, brushing crumbs into the trash. "Maybe it just has to feel like home." And in that moment, surrounded by remnants of laughter and a shared future, I knew without a doubt that we were building our own journey, brick by brick, and I wouldn't have it any other way. It was one of those Saturday afternoons where the sun seemed to hang a little lower in the sky, bathing everything in a warm golden light. I was just wrapping up my shift at the local diner, exhausted but oddly content. I had spent the day serving coffee and pancakes to the usual crowd, a familiar mix of regulars and unfamiliar faces. As I tossed my apron aside and climbed into my old truck, the smell of grease and syrup lingered, a strange comfort after a long shift. My plan was simple, a quick trip to the recycling center with a collection of cans I had saved up. I didn't think much of it, a handful of aluminum from my kitchen and the diner combined, a tiny contribution to my Friday night cleanup ritual. But as I parked in front of the recycling center, I noticed a woman standing by my truck, her eyes darting around like a squirrel on caffeine. Maybe it was the weariness of the day, or perhaps a rush of instinct, but something about her felt off. Still, I brushed it aside, pulled out my phone to scroll mindlessly through social media while I waited. A few moments passed before I looked up to see her rummaging in the back of my truck, lifting the bag of cans as if it were the Holy Grail. My heart dropped. "Hey! What are you doing?" I yelled, more out of shock than anger. I should have just let it go, but something snapped inside me. Maybe it was the day overriding my sleep-deprived brain, but I jumped out of the truck, my feet hitting the pavement with purpose. "That's mine." I found myself standing there, half expecting her to drop the bag and flee. But she turned to face me, and that's when I noticed the lines on her face, the weariness in her eyes that mirrored my own. "It's just cans," she shrugged, her voice sharp yet tinged with an edge of desperation. I felt a rush of sympathy mingling with my anger. Maybe she was struggling, maybe these cans were worth more to her than to me. Yet I thought back to how hard I worked for those pennies, each can a testament to my efforts. I get it, I said, softer now, trying to find common ground. But they're mine. I need to take them to recycling. The tension in the air was palpable, like rubber bands stretched to their limit. For a moment, we both stood there, two strangers caught up in an unwinnable standoff. I wasn't a confrontational person by nature. I often preferred to drift through the world rather than disturb the status quo, but here I was, presenting a challenge. Something flickered in her eyes, a mixture of anger, shame, and maybe a hint of vulnerability. "This is how I pay for my kids' lunch," she blurted out, her voice cracking. My heart softened further, each beat echoing doubt in my mind. Was I an asshole for wanting to stand my ground? Was I denying her the means to survive? I took a deep breath and tried to rationalize it all. "I'm sure you're struggling. I get it. But I can't just give this to you." We hovered in this uncomfortable limbo, the weight of her desperation palpable. The bags of cans and my anger felt so trivial in the face of her honesty. I felt torn, split between being protective of my meager possessions and recognizing a need that resonated deep within my own heart. In a moment that felt like an eternity, I decided to compromise. "How about this? I'll help you gather more cans, and you can take any we find together. I could use an extra set of hands." The tension peaked for a split second, then slowly began to unravel. Her brow furrowed in disbelief as if trying to gauge my sincerity. "You wouldn't just call the cops?" she asked, her body relaxing but still cautious. I shook my head. "No, I won't. We're just two people trying to get by." In the end, we spent the next half hour combing through the neighborhood, collecting discarded cans. As we gathered our bounty, we talked. I learned her name was Maggie and that she was a single mother struggling to make ends meet. She was filled with laughter that sounded both weary and hopeful. I realized that my earlier irritation was so small compared to the stories people were carrying, including my own. When we finished, we looked at our small haul, and I dug into my pocket to pull out a $10 bill. "Here. Just for today," I said, feeling a warmth build in my chest. "This might not be much, but go buy those kids a few sandwiches." Maggie hesitated for a moment, then accepted the money, tears welling in her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered, and for the first time that day, I felt something within me lift, a sort of lightness that came from sharing the burden. I drove away that day with my heart heavier yet somehow also free, reflecting on how sometimes standing your ground could mean building a bridge instead. Months later, I still think about that afternoon. Did it fix everything? No. Did I get my cans back? Well, I learned to look beyond those cans for a moment, beyond possessions and comfort. I guess the world isn't just about fighting to protect what's yours. Sometimes, it's about recognizing what you can give up and seeing how far kindness can stretch, even if it comes from unexpected places. In a way, we both walked away with something that day, just not what we initially thought we needed. It's funny how life teaches you lessons in the most unpredictable ways. That day with the woman and my bag of cans shifted something deep within me, though the overt changes weren't immediate. I still had that tiny moment etched in my memory, the way her eyes briefly lit up when I handed her a couple of dollars, how taken aback she was when I told her to keep the cans. I had expected anger, had braced myself for her indignation when I confronted her about the theft, but the twist caught me off guard. Instead, I found a person who was just as lost in the world as I sometimes felt. It occurred to me that maybe what I saw as a desperate act of theft was part of a larger story I didn't know. I recalled her dirty hands, her weathered face, and the sadness that lingered like a shadow. As the weeks turned into months, I found myself reflecting on our encounter more often than I'd like to admit. Initially, I tried to justify my actions, clinging to my right to get my property back, convinced that I was in the right. But gradually, my grip on that sense of righteousness loosened. I would drive by the same corner where she had taken the cans, and I began to wonder about her life, who she was outside of that moment. Did she have friends? Was she okay? Occasionally, I'd see others like her, standing on the streets, carrying their circumstances like a heavy load, and I felt an urge to engage, to ask if they were all right. One night, on my way home from a late shift, I stopped at a local diner. It was nothing fancy but had decent burgers and endless coffee. As I was finishing my meal, a woman approached me, an all too familiar look in her eyes. It was her, the woman from the truck. My heart raced. She looked different, more alert, perhaps. I could see the scarring from whatever struggle she was battling, but there was also resilience in her expression. I wasn't sure if she recognized me, but I decided to take the leap. I smiled and said, "Hey, it's you. From the corner. With the cans." She blinked, a flash of recognition crossing her face before she hid it. "Yeah, I remember," she replied, a mix of pride and discomfort in her voice. I could sense the walls she'd built were still towering high. Yet, it didn't end there. We ended up talking for an hour over greasy fries, and I learned more about her circumstances than I anticipated. Her name was Rachel, and she had been struggling for years, trying to make ends meet in a world that kept kicking her when she was down. I shared bits about my life too, my own failures and frustrations, finding common threads of struggle and resilience that bridged the social gap between us. As we shared stories, I began to see humanity in Rachel, and she in me. What started as a moment of conflict turned into a profound connection. I was astonished at how little a person sometimes needs to feel heard. I offered her a few more dollars, insisting it was for a meal, nothing more, and she hesitated but took it. Our exchange felt interwoven with something rich and unspoken, the air humming with unacknowledged understanding. Months later, when I think about that day, I realize it was more than reclaiming my bag of cans or sorting out who was right or wrong. It had spiraled into something beautiful, showing me that sometimes standing your ground means building a bridge instead. I don't always see her, but whenever I do catch a glimpse of her, there's a nod of recognition that passes between us, a silent agreement grounded in empathy. It's strange how kindness can spread like ripples in a pond, starting from a simple act that feels so mundane in the grand scope of life. Little by little, I learned to look beyond possessions, and in doing so, I discovered the true essence of what it means to care for others, and that, perhaps, was the greatest reward of all. I still remember the first time I saw her again after that day by my truck. It was a rainy afternoon, the kind of day that pulls the colors out of the world, making everything look muted and gray. I was walking home from work, my mind tangled in thoughts about the week ahead, meetings that felt pointless and deadlines looming like storm clouds. Just as I turned the corner, I saw her huddled under a bus stop awning, the same worn-out jacket pulled tight around her shoulders. For a moment, I hesitated. Was she still that woman who had taken my bags of cans? I thought about the anger and fear that had welled up in me when I'd confronted her, how I had been ready to yell, ready to proclaim my territory. But now, as I stood there watching her count something in her lap, maybe a few stray coins, maybe hopes for the day, I felt that old tension fade away. Instead of crossing the street to avoid her, I walked closer. "Hey," I said, trying to sound casual, as if the weight of our previous encounter didn't hang in the air between us. She looked up, surprise flickering across her face. "I remember you." The way she said it sent a rush of unexpected warmth through me. I caught her eye and nodded. There was no animosity this time, only a shared moment that acknowledged our past. "What are you doing out here?" I asked, the rain drizzling down and inviting us both into a more intimate conversation. "Waiting for a friend," she replied, her voice sounding small yet steady. Not sure what I was thinking, honestly. I glanced at the bus schedule, then back at her. "Want to grab a coffee? There's a little place just down the street." She hesitated, biting her lip, and I could sense her internal struggle. This wasn't the typical interaction you'd have in a city, especially with someone you had a rocky history with. But she did something surprising. She nodded, and that felt like a bridge between us, even if it was fragile. As we settled into a small booth at the cafe, the scent of fresh brewing coffee wrapping around us, I learned her name, Maya. It turned out her world was much darker than I had guessed. She shared stories of losing a job and stumbling into hard times, realities that were stark and raw. I thought about the anger that had bubbled within me when she'd taken what was mine, completely ignorant of what was happening in her world. "Look, I know what I did was wrong," she said quietly, tracing the rim of her coffee cup with her finger, "but it wasn't just about the cans. I wasn't thinking straight. I was desperate." Her honesty hit me like a cold splash of water. I had spent most of my adult life pinching pennies, too, and it made me question how I would have reacted in her shoes. "What do you do when the world turns its back?" "I get it," I said slowly. "I really do. But there's no shame in asking for help." That seemed to resonate with her. We talked for hours, two people who had been strangers, now sharing bits and pieces of their lives over steaming mugs. She was funny and insightful, and I started to see the glimmer of hope in her eyes, a light that had been dimmed but wasn't entirely extinguished. By the time we parted ways, that nod I had used to recognize her before became a wave, an acknowledgement that we were both just trying to navigate our way through life's complications. In the months that followed, our encounters became more frequent. Sometimes she'd call if she needed a referral for a job. Other times, I'd see her at the same bus stop, and we'd share quick laughs about life's absurdities. It didn't always lead to deep conversations or outstretching help, but the familiarity felt comforting, a reminder that human connections could blossom from the most unexpected circumstances. Reflecting back on it all, I learned something critical: we all have our battles, our shabby jackets we wear to shield ourselves from the world. But maybe what makes our journeys worthwhile is not just the things we gather along the way, those cans, those ambitions, but the people we meet and the finite moments when we open ourselves to understanding. I never got those bags of cans back, but, honestly, I've come to realize that sometimes what you think you need pales in comparison to understanding someone else's struggle. We both gained something that day we stepped out from behind our defenses, and as I walked home that night feeling lighter, I knew that bridge between us was something I'd treasure far more than any material possession. It was a Saturday afternoon when I found myself sitting across from my younger brother, Sam, in our favorite coffee shop, the air filled with the rich aroma of brewing espresso and baked goods that set my nerves on edge more than I cared to admit. I loved Sam, really, he was funny and sweet, but sometimes his quirks, an endearing part of his autism, would test my patience. As he meticulously explained the minutiae of a video game I had no interest in, he kept pausing to correct me whenever I mispronounced a character's name or misunderstood the plot. I could feel the familiar irritation bubbling up, making me wonder if I was the only one who noticed. "You don't have to correct me every single time," I finally blurted out, looking down at my coffee cup as if I were trying to see my own troubled reflection in the dark liquid. The cafe was buzzing around us, but in that moment, it felt like we were in our own world, one where I was both the older sibling and, apparently, the villain. I looked at Sam, his expression shifting from shock to hurt, and immediately wanted to retract my words. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean it like that." But he didn't reply, just stared at his half-eaten muffin, as if the crumbs had suddenly become the most interesting thing in the room. I knew I should have just let him share his passion without interruption. After all, this was what made Sam happy, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I had lost my temper and crossed a line. My thoughts raced, I was tired, overwhelmed with work and everyday life's pressures, yet here was my brother, excitedly sharing a piece of his world with me. Shouldn't I be more supportive? And yet, this constant need for accuracy felt suffocating at times. The more I thought about it, the more frustrated I became with myself. My silence hung heavy between us until he finally whispered, "I just want to help." In that moment, it hit me like a punch to the gut. This wasn't merely about a character's name. It was about Sam wanting to connect, to share his knowledge, and my dismissiveness had dimmed that spark. As we left the cafe, I resolved to be more patient, to remember that my brother's corrections didn't stem from a desire to belittle me but from a place of connection, even if it sometimes felt stifling. A couple of weeks later, I found myself texting him random things I was learning from a podcast about his favorite games, asking for his thoughts and deepening our conversations. We still had our moments, sure, I still occasionally winced when he'd launch into a correction I didn't ask for. But each time it happened, I reminded myself why I loved hearing him speak about his passions, and I found my frustrations melting away. I'd like to think I wasn't the asshole in this story after all, but someone learning to navigate this complex bond. It was a rainy Saturday afternoon when it hit me just how much progress we'd made. I was curled up on the couch with a steaming mug of tea, listening to the sound of raindrops tapping against the window, and I had this overwhelming urge to share something exciting I'd learned about an upcoming game release that we'd both been anticipating. Instead of the involuntary dread I usually felt, I picked up my phone, hesitated for just a moment, and texted him. "Hey, I just read they're adding an interdimensional feature to the new game, can you believe it?" Within seconds, my brother's text alert chimed. "Yeah. Interdimensional travel means they could really expand the story. I hope they keep the parallel universe idea in mind." I felt a surge of warmth in my chest, a connection that felt more genuine than any correction he'd ever thrown my way. It was moments like these that reminded me how deep our bond ran, masked beneath layers of quirks and differences. Of course, that didn't mean everything was perfect. Just a week later, I made the seemingly innocent mistake of calling one of the game characters a villain during one of our usual gaming sessions. Almost instantly, he shot back a correction, pointing out that the character's motives were far more complex than my casual label suggested. "You know his backstory is about redemption, right? You can't just label him like that." I felt the familiar sting of irritation creeping back in, but I paused. I was about to reply with a snarky retort when I remembered the conversations we had been sharing, the laughter and insights eclipsing the corrections. Instead, I took a breath and said, "Fair point." I needed that reminder. I sometimes get way too caught up in my impressions. His surprise was palpable even through the screen. Glad you see it that way. The story is nuanced. Learning and understanding make it even more exciting. He didn't know it, but I was beginning to feel the weight of my previous frustrations lift, replaced with a sense of appreciation for how much more he had to offer. Slowly, I started consciously approaching our conversations with curiosity rather than defensiveness. Sometimes I'd even invite his corrections, framing them as challenges rather than annoyances. It became a game of sorts. What knowledge could he share next? Our hangouts transformed from mere game nights into deep dives where he could geek out about characters, plot points, and storytelling techniques. Yes, I still occasionally winced at the over-explanations or overly detailed corrections, but now, instead of seeing them as bothersome interruptions, I began to find them oddly charming. They were pieces of my brother that shaped him into who he was, a passionate perfectionist with a heart bursting at the seams for his interests. I also discovered that in those moments of explaining, something beautiful happened. We were bonding over the nuances of the narratives we both adored. One Sunday, we decided to take a break from our usual weekend routine to watch a movie marathon based on some of our favorite game franchises. A few hours in, I noticed something magical unfolding. He was animated, speaking excitedly about how he would adapt the stories differently. You know, if I were to write this, I'd change the ending completely. It's not true to the character's development, he said, eyes bright with enthusiasm. Instead of asking him to dial it back or find a quieter volume, I just smiled and nodded, letting his passion wash over me like an invigorating wave. I chimed in with my own ideas, and before long, we were brainstorming a story of our own, piecing together plot lines and character arcs as if screenwriting was a game in itself. It felt like both of us were learning in that moment, not just about the movies or games we loved, but about each other, who we were as siblings, and how we could evolve. I had to admit, there was something healing about this shift. I've learned that sometimes, it takes a little vulnerability to bring two people closer. Maybe I wasn't just tolerating his corrections anymore. Maybe I was actually embracing his perspective, recognizing that our divergent approaches were a tapestry that made our relationship rich and vibrant. As the rain continued to patter softly against the windows, I luxuriated in the knowledge that we were navigating this complex relationship together. I found myself feeling grateful, hoping that even as my brother poured out corrections, I could do my part to help him see that his voice mattered to me. It may still get complicated sometimes, but I felt that complexity was what made our bond so beautifully unique. And maybe, just maybe, it was this all-encompassing journey through learning and understanding that turned out to be the real win. One quiet afternoon, as I perched on the edge of my bed, fully immersed in the imaginary worlds of my favorite fantasy novel, my phone buzzed insistently. It was him, of course, my brother, the ever-passionate encyclopedia of all things gaming. I felt a tingle of excitement mixed with a hint of anxiety, that familiar nod as I wondered if this text would be another innocent inquiry or a deep dive into one of his meticulous corrections. Did you know that in the lore of AITAH, the main character actually has a hidden backstory that ties in with the prophecy? I smiled at his enthusiasm, picturing him animatedly pacing around his room while typing. Yeah, I just learned about that on a podcast. I replied, careful to convey my interest. That's when he dropped it. I'm glad you like it, but you actually missed a couple of key points. You see. And there it was, that familiar avalanche of information I hadn't asked for, cascading down like an unexpected rain shower. My first instinct was to feel that familiar frustration rising, a heat creeping up my neck. But this time something clicked inside me. Instead of letting that prickly feeling take hold, I chose to breathe, sinking deeper into the moment, feeling the vulnerability behind his enthusiasm. I wasn't just being corrected, I was witnessing his excitement and love for a topic that mattered deeply to him. Dude, I really appreciate you sharing this with me, I texted back, and I'm totally here for the details. But I also want to dive into this together, you know? I want to connect over it, not just absorb facts. There was a pause, and for a moment, I worried I might have crossed a line again. But a few moments later, my phone chimed with his reply. Okay, I can try that. I just get really excited, and I want you to know everything. And in those few exchanged messages, I felt like I was glimpsing a new layer of our relationship, one built on understanding, empathy, and respect. The rain continued to rhythmically tap against the glass, a soothing soundtrack to my thoughts as I contemplated how this new approach could alleviate that tension that sometimes bubbled between us. It felt like stepping into a dance. I was learning the rhythm, realizing I didn't have to lead or follow, just move together. In the weeks that followed, our conversations evolved in unexpected ways. We began sharing our interpretations of his favorite games, parsing through characters and plots, discovering that sharing ideas was just as enriching as correcting each other. One Thursday evening, we settled down for a marathon of an old game, the kind that made us both nostalgic. As I stumbled through levels and faced wily enemies, he grinned at my blunders but hesitated to correct me. Instead, he cheered me on, his encouragement washing over me like a warm breeze. I could feel the shift in our dynamic, like turning a page in a book where the story finally aligns. By the time I slammed that virtual sword into the final boss, we both erupted into cheers, the air thick with camaraderie. It was genuine. It was beautiful. Reflecting on our journey, I realized we were two flawed yet perfectly unique characters navigating this intricate world together, learning to appreciate each other's quirks. Sure, there might be hiccups now and then, maybe some unexpected corrections still would slip through, but now, when they did, I'd remind myself of this growth, this bond that was as rich and vibrant as the stories woven into our favorite games. Looking back, I didn't just learn how to handle those moments of correction, I learned to cherish our conversations, seeing them as threads that connected us in ways I never fully understood before. This journey wasn't just about me, it was about us building and redefining how we communicated. And as I sank into my pillow that night, listening to the pitter-patter of the rain, I felt so much more at peace with the trials of our relationship, grateful to navigate this complex tapestry together, wondering what stories we would continue to weave as we journeyed forward. It was a Friday night when everything spiraled out of control. My roommates had left for the weekend, and I was finally looking forward to a little alone time with a guy I had been seeing for a few weeks, Jake. We'd been texting like teenagers, and deciding to have him over felt both thrilling and slightly reckless. The rain was pouring outside, creating a cozy atmosphere, and all I could think about was how nice it would be to watch a movie and share some popcorn together. But as the night unfolded, I realized I was in for more than I bargained for. Just as we settled down on the couch, the mood lit by soft lighting and the faint sound of raindrops hitting the window, my phone buzzed. It was a message from my roommate, Melissa, who had gone home to her mom's place. At first, I shrugged it off, but when I glanced at the message, my heart sank. "Hey, can you keep it down? My mom is trying to sleep." I thought about responding to reassure her, but then Jake leaned closer, and I forgot about my phone altogether. The dialogue in front of us faded as tension filled the air, and it wasn't long before we were lost in each other. Just as the movie played on, laughter erupted from me, followed by Jake's playful remarks. That's when it happened. 3 loud, furious knocks pounded at my door, punctuated by the unmistakable voice of Melissa's mom. "Shut the fuck up." It was an implosion of shock. I froze, wild thoughts racing through my mind. Did she really just pound on my door? In my apartment? I glanced at Jake, who looked just as startled, and for a moment, we exchanged looks, an unspoken mix of embarrassment and disbelief. I didn't want to open the door, but I also felt weirdly obligated to address what had just happened. I took a deep breath, my cheeks heating up as I approached the door. I peeked through the peephole, half expecting it to be my imagination, but she was there, arms crossed and a scowl that could scare a bear. Can I help you?" I called out, keeping my voice steady despite the whirlwind of emotions stirring inside me. "This is my apartment, and I'd appreciate a little respect." But instead of backing off, she banged harder. "You shouldn't be so loud. Think of others." There was an immediate tension in the air, thick enough to cut. I was furious but also flustered and embarrassed. The last thing I wanted was to be in a standoff with my roommate's mom. "I'm sorry, we'll keep it down," I replied, the words feeling like defeat. Jake shifted awkwardly behind me, and I felt myself shrinking, like a child caught misbehaving. When her footsteps faded away, I turned back to Jake, my cheeks still burning. "I can't believe that just happened," I said, my voice barely a whisper, feeling both humiliated and annoyed. "Yeah, that was intense," Jake replied, trying to lighten the mood with a crooked smile. But I couldn't shake off my embarrassment. "Do you think I'm the asshole here?" I asked, half joking but deep down, feeling the weight of her words. "I mean, it's our space." But then again, I didn't think about how loud we were being. Jake shrugged. "I think she overreacted. Just because she doesn't want to hear you having fun doesn't mean you should have to hide." I nodded, feeling a little comforted, but I couldn't escape the swirl of mixed emotions. As the night continued, it was hard to focus on anything else. The initial excitement had fizzled into a mix of anxiety and self-doubt. What if Melissa felt the same way? What if I really was the problem? After he left, I collapsed onto my bed, The night replaying in my head like a broken record. Should I write to Melissa and apologize, or would that just confirm I was in the wrong? Was I really the one who'd crossed a line here? In the days that followed, I spent a considerable amount of time lost in a loop of whether or not I should approach Melissa about it again. Part of me felt defensive. It was my home, after all, but then again, I didn't want to create unnecessary tension between us. Eventually, I did reach out. "Hey, can we chat? I'm sorry if we were too loud the other night," I typed out. I watched the three little dots dance as she typed back, my anxiety bubbling. "It's fine. Mom just gets like that sometimes. Thanks for saying something." The relief washed over me, but this lingering question hung in the air: was I truly wrong to let loose in my own space? In the end, it didn't seem to matter as much. I learned that sometimes, even in your home, you have to navigate the constant balancing act of respect and personal freedom. And that's just life, finding that middle ground between living fiercely and being considerate. Even if it took a knock on the door from Melissa's mom to figure it out, it was a lesson learned. It was a couple of weeks later when the whole scenario faded into a distant memory, tucked neatly alongside other college mishaps. I was mostly back to my routine: classes, work, the occasional movie night with roommates. But every now and then, I'd catch myself glancing at the door, half expecting another unexpected visitor. It wasn't that my roommate's mom was a regular fixture in our lives, but that incident had a way of imprinting itself, a reminder that boundaries could be so easily crossed. One evening, I had finally decided to treat myself and unwind with a glass of cheap wine and that new show everyone was raving about. I remember feeling the warmth of the alcohol settle comfortably in my stomach as the credits rolled. The apartment was quieter than usual, the hum of the refrigerator a soft backdrop to my thoughts, and I couldn't resist the urge to kick back and binge watch. Just as I was sinking into the couch, a message pinged on my phone. It was Melissa, my roommate, asking if I could give her a ride to the grocery store. I noticed the clock. It was nearing 10 p.m. I hesitated for a moment, torn between my desire to relax undisturbed and wanting to be a good roommate. Opting for the latter, I texted back, "Sure. Just let me finish this episode." Melissa's response was quick, clearly eager. "Thanks. I'll be ready in 15. As I tossed my phone onto the couch, I found myself smirking at the irony of the situation. The last time I'd had a guy over, it hadn't gone great, but here I was, willingly putting on my altruistic hat and totally ignoring that nagging voice in my head. 15 minutes later, I was in the one car we had shared, parked in the grocery store lot surrounded by flickering fluorescent lights. Melissa climbed in, a flurry of movement with her purse and a list that she waved enthusiastically in front of my face. I made a plan this time. "We won't end up with 8 boxes of cereal," I chuckled, appreciating her diligent efforts to keep our fridge alive. As we drove, I couldn't help but notice how her mood had shifted over the last few weeks. Melissa seemed lighter, happier. Maybe it was just the thrill of independence or a deeper realization about her own boundaries. Either way, it was nice to see her so animated, and it started to tug at my heart a little, reminding me she was a good friend, despite her mom's overly assertive parenting style. The atmosphere in the car buzzed with easy conversations about mundane things: classes, parties, the ever-growing stack of laundry that awaited both us at home. But as we turned off the lively street into the quieter residential neighborhood, I felt a pang of anxiety mingle with the lightness. I didn't want to navigate any emotional heaviness tonight. Just as I was thinking about the general awfulness of adulting, Melissa's phone buzzed. I could see her mumble, "Oh, it's my mom," as she clicked on the message. "What does she want?" I asked, half joking. Melissa promptly rolled her eyes, but her expression shifted. "Oh. I think she's asking why I haven't returned home yet." I smirked, ready to tease her about being grown, but caught myself. She had been assertively carving out her own space lately, even splurging on new clothes and ditching old habits she no longer wanted. That confidence felt contagious, but instantly, I felt twinges of guilt for my own behavior. Did I have a moment to share the living fiercely lesson I'd learned? Or was I just biding my time until my own surface changed? As we entered the store, I tried to shake off the creeping sensation. Eventually, Melissa and I fell into our usual routine, scanning the aisles for snacks and sharing our dietary sins with each other. A rhythm, a comfort. Somewhere around the frozen foods, we heard a commotion. I glanced back towards the entrance, wrinkling my brow. A man standing outside the store was clearly trying to get someone's attention, waving his arms like a conductor. I didn't think much of it, but Melissa paused mid-sentence and stared, an expression of recognition washing over her face. "Oh no," she muttered. It's my mom. I turned and sure enough, there was her mom, hands on her hips, staring at the man as if he might turn into a pumpkin at midnight. My heart sank a bit for Melissa. The last thing you want is your mother circling like a hawk on your coattails. Just as I was contemplating our escape route, her mom finally saw us. It was like those moments in bad sitcoms where the planet stops spinning, and every character locks eyes in slow motion. "Melissa. I was looking for you," she shouted, her voice ricocheting off the store walls. We exchanged glances, a silent agreement of solidarity. I could only imagine what was coming. As her mom marched toward us with purpose, I debated whether I should vanish into the cereal aisle or just face the impending storm. "Mom, it's fine. We're just shopping," Melissa chimed, but her mom wasn't having it. She wasted no time pointing an accusatory finger at the guy outside. "You can't let some stranger talk you into late-night runs, Melissa." It struck me like a bolt of lightning. Melissa shrank a little before her mom's fierce gaze. I could see the conflict dance in her eyes, loyalty to her upbringing versus the newfound freedom she was still testing out. What was I supposed to do? I stood there, feeling like a spectator to a complex play where the spoilers had all been handed out, but I was still in the audience. It felt all too familiar, this crossroad between childhood and adult independence. "I think you should apologize," her mom continued, her voice strained yet firm, but I observed a flicker of uncertainty in Melissa's eyes. The lessons learnt came rushing back to me, and I found myself taking a slow breath. I couldn't intervene directly, that would only throw fuel on the fire, but I wanted to help, to be part of her process of establishing that line she needed, just like I was doing for myself. "Or maybe we're both allowed to navigate our own choices, Mom?" I found myself saying, my heart racing. It felt awkward to speak up but somehow necessary. The tension in the air turned thick as her mom's expression shifted sharply in my direction, sudden recognition. "You too, huh? What a fun way to confuse the adults." She huffed, a mixture of frustration and disbelief intermingling in her expression. But there was something more, maybe an inkling of understanding that she wasn't the only one learning here. And just like that, I felt Melissa at my side, her posture straightening ever so slightly, emboldened to confront this moment. That nothingness between all of us had shifted, and as we stood there, I sensed the space for a dialogue, a chance to redefine it rather than simply acquiesce. All I could think was how beautifully human it was to navigate those turbulent waters together. As the conversation pivoted slowly but surely, it felt less like a scolding and more like a chance for both Melissa and her mom to meet halfway. The anxiety washed away, leaving behind a glimmer of hope for growth. Later that night, we returned home, our bags of supplies in tow. Melissa turned to me, beaming. "That was kind of you, by the way." I shrugged it off. But inside, I felt a swell of pride. I figured it had taken more than a knock at my door to find that balance, but wasn't that the real point? And as I settled on the couch again, wrapped in a familiar blanket, I recognized that sometimes life does require navigating a complex dance between assertiveness and empathy. Even if no one got the perfect score, we were all learning together, step by awkward step. As I settled into that well-worn couch, the remnants of our chaotic evening danced in my mind like strobe lights. My phone buzzed with a text from Melissa, "THX for being cool today. Want to finish that movie?" I glanced at the clock, midnight, but the couch was calling me. I tapped back, "Absolutely," feeling a warmth in my chest that relaxed the tension from earlier. I couldn't help but smile. The door incident had transformed from an awkward moment into something almost bonding. Melissa had a way of making even the most uncomfortable situations seem light. As she walked back into the room, tossing her hair over her shoulder and plopping down next to me, I felt grateful for her presence. We fired up the movie, but my mind kept wandering back to that knock on the door. What if I'd reacted differently? I could have stood my ground, thrown a snarky comment back at her mom. Yet, something in me knew that wouldn't have ended well. It's funny how an impulsive night can morph into a reflective conversation. Between whirs of the DVD player and the intimate glow of the TV, I pondered our little family of sorts, this quirky motley crew we had become. As the movie played, I peeked over at Melissa, who was completely absorbed in the film. I used to think of her as just a roommate, but through shared moments like these, she had become something deeper, a friend. I realized maybe we were all a bit like that, a collection of awkward encounters stitched together by our attempts to understand each other. Halfway through the film, her phone buzzed. She picked it up, her face dropping slightly. That flutter of concern pulled me out of the fictional world we'd trapped ourselves in. "It's my mom," she said, her voice tinged with apprehension. "I'd better take this." I nodded, feeling an unexpected wave of protectiveness wash over me. I didn't want any more drama tonight. I listened to her side of the conversation, the commendable sonorous tone she adopted to reassure her mom. A few minutes later, she returned, her smile forced. "Just a little concerned about me, you know how it is." "But I told her I'm fine," she added, her expression softening. We settled back into our movie, but I could tell it affected her. "Do you ever feel like you have to keep convincing people you're okay, even when you're perfectly fine?" I asked, trying to understand the weight of her burden. Melissa glanced at me, her eyes dancing with surprise. "All the time. It's exhausting, especially when you're just trying to enjoy life." We shared a silence, each lost in our thoughts, resonating in the unspoken understanding of what it meant to live under the expectations of others. After what felt like an eternity wrapped in our shared silences, she finally muttered, "Thanks for being chill today. It means a lot now." "Yeah, well, some days I stumble less than others," I replied with a hint of laughter, hoping to lighten the mood as the movie credits began to roll. The laughter felt comforting, a reminder of why I cherished these moments, even those tempered by uncomfortable knocks on the door. After the movie ended, we fell into our usual routine of chatting about the plot and debating character choices, but beneath that light-hearted conversation lingered a seriousness. I could sense the flickers of realization in the air, that we were learning how to coexist, showing consideration for each other's vulnerabilities while carving out our spaces. The night wore on, the world outside growing quiet, but inside our apartment, life pulsed with potential and vulnerability, reminding me that this space belonged to all of us. The lessons we absorbed weren't just individual, they were shared, and we were better for it. I mused on this balance we were gradually discovering, an intricate dance, and perhaps that constant, uneasy rhythm was what made life richer. As I nestled deeper into my blanket, the shadows of our earlier chaos turned to whispers of understanding. Sure, boundaries and respect were important, but what really mattered was the effort to bridge those gaps. Reflecting on our interactions, I couldn't help but feel optimistic about what tomorrow would bring, knowing that in our struggles to meet in the middle, we found something profoundly human: connection. I drifted off, the faint sounds of laughter lingering in my ears, hopeful for whatever adventures lay ahead. I never thought a night out with friends could turn into such a ridiculous dilemma, but here I was, sitting on a bar stool, nursing my drink and feeling increasingly uncomfortable. It was a Saturday night, and my friends and I decided to hit up our favorite dive bar, the one with neon lights flashing and the kind of energy that makes you forget about work for a while. The laughter and chatter around me felt inviting, but a creeping tension settled in my stomach as the night wore on. There was this guy, Jason, a friend of a friend, who'd been hanging around our group. He was charming in an overly friendly way, and I'd tried to shake off the sense that he was enjoying my company a bit too much. When the night started winding down, Jason proposed that we all share an Uber back to our neighborhood. I was totally on board until he added, "But it's a little tight, so, if you want to sit on my lap, it's cool." A rush of embarrassment washed over me, mixed with indignation. I laughed it off, hoping it was a joke, but he just grinned, clearly serious. I could feel my friend's eyes darting around, unsure, some snickering at the absurdity. My heart raced, and for a fleeting moment, I considered the situation, a mixed bag of social pressure and a desire not to be the downer of the group. But something deep inside me recoiled at the idea of sitting on a stranger's lap, even for a 6-minute ride. I didn't want to make a scene, but the thought alone left a bad taste in my mouth. I didn't want to be rude, yet I couldn't shake off the feeling that it would trivialize my own boundaries. In that instant, I decided. "No, thanks," I said, trying to sound lighthearted, "I'll just call an Uber." Jason raised an eyebrow, and I could feel a flicker of surprise from the others. I could hear my heartbeat in my ears as I pulled out my phone, almost relieved when I saw the app open, like a lifeline. The ride arrived almost immediately, and as I slid into the back seat, the warm glow of the streetlights comforted me. I didn't feel guilty, I felt empowered for choosing my own space, my own comfort. But the next day, I woke up to a flurry of mixed texts from my friends. Some thought I had totally overreacted, while others supported my decision. Jason texted me, claiming I was overreacting and, at first, I felt a twinge of uncertainty. Did I really screw things up? Yet, the more I pondered, the more I realized how important it was to stand my ground. So I replied with calm resolve, "I respect myself too much to sit on someone's lap." It was silent on his end after that. Eventually, my friends and I had a long conversation where I expressed my feelings, and to my surprise, they rallied behind me. It's funny how a night that started off as just another outing turned into a lesson about boundaries. So, am I the asshole for taking an Uber home instead of sitting on a man's lap? I guess I learned you've got to prioritize your comfort over what's deemed polite, and in the end, standing up for yourself is never the wrong move. It was late when I finally decided to share the story on Reddit. I remember the glow of my phone screen illuminating my tired face as I typed, feeling the weight of the night rest heavily on my shoulders. In the dim light of the living room, with my friends finally winding down after a long evening of laughter and too many drinks, I couldn't shake the tension that had built up over the past few hours. I had gone to the bar that night thinking I was just going to unwind, have a few laughs, and maybe flirt with some cute guys. I didn't expect to find myself in a situation that felt more uncomfortable than exhilarating. It started innocently enough. We were all seated around the booth, sharing stories and shots, and I loved the energy. But as the night went on, the bar grew busier, and tables filled in like sardines. I could feel the air growing heavier, the laughter mixing with the loud music. That's when a guy, let's call him Tom, plopped down next to me. He was charming, I'll give him that, with a disarming smile and witty jokes that kept the mood light. Things took a turn, though, when I noticed the space in the booth could barely accommodate all of us. I was sitting on the edge, and Tom suggested that since it was so cramped, I could just sit on his lap. In the moment, I felt a weird blend of panic and disbelief. I laughed it off, playing it coy, but Tom persisted. I was bewildered. I mean, who offers that up? My body was tense, every instinct urging me to flee. I could feel my heart racing as I tried to summon a smile, but deep down, I was only feeling more and more uncomfortable. As I caught the worried glances from my friends, I took a deep breath and stood my ground, saying, I'd rather just take an Uber home, thanks. And honestly, it was brave of me. I felt brave, until I saw Tom's face fall, that smirk replaced with a mix of confusion and irritation. My friends exchanged looks, and I could hear quiet whispers, some in support of me, others unsure, and I felt suddenly trapped in my own mind. Did I overreact? Was I being rude? I couldn't shake the feeling that perhaps this was just a harmless suggestion in the eyes of some, but for me, it represented a line I wasn't willing to cross. After stepping outside to call the Uber, I felt the cool night air hit me like a needed wake-up call. I thought of all the times I had compromised my comfort for the sake of others' expectations, and it filled me with resolve. I'd rather ride alone than feel that pressure to sit on a stranger's lap. As I sat in the back seat, scrolling through Reddit, a thought struck me. Perhaps what I'd experienced wasn't just about that particular instance but about speaking up in a world where being nice sometimes felt like just a cover for discomfort. After typing my story and hitting post, I felt an odd mix of relief and vulnerability. As the comments started rolling in, so many people understood my perspective. You're not the asshole, echoed from screen to screen, a chorus of solidarity that warmed my heart. And while the night was far from what I'd hoped, it turned into something much more significant than just a poorly timed joke. Yes, it was just a night out, but it transformed into an unexpected lesson about what it means to trust yourself. I spent the next few days thinking about that experience, recognizing how often we brush off our own boundaries for the sake of acceptance. I even started to notice more of those moments in my daily life, where I'd hesitate to voice my discomfort, swayed by the fear of seeming rude. Reading through the supportive threads fueled my drive to stand my ground, and I began to embrace saying no when I needed to, a skill I realized I'd neglected in my efforts to go along to get along. A couple of weeks later, I saw Tom again at another bar, and instead of feeling anxious, I just felt indifferent. He approached me to chat, and I politely kept the conversation light. I knew I had made the right choice that night, because ultimately, valuing my comfort over someone else's casual expectation felt like a small victory. I ended up getting home that night feeling empowered, and while I know I might face similar situations again, I also know now that being true to myself is always worth it, no matter how awkward it feels in the moment. In the end, I learned that standing up for myself is never a wrong move. It's a chance to rediscover my voice, my space, and my boundaries. So no, I'm not the asshole for choosing an Uber over a lap, but I'm proud I chose to prioritize me. As I sank into my couch, the soft fabric enveloping me, I couldn't shake the odd blend of liberation and anxiety that still buzzed inside me. It was strange how such a simple decision could spark so many emotions. I replayed the night in my mind, the vibrant laughter, the thumping bass of the music, the wave of warmth that washed over me as I watched my friends dance, each of them lost in their own world. I remembered the moment it shifted, that realization that I was uncomfortable, That pressure to conform to an unspoken agreement just to keep the peace. I had always considered myself a go-with-the-flow person, but that night, I felt something crack within me, something that whispered it was okay to disrupt the flow, that it was okay to be a stick in the proverbial wheel if it meant preserving my integrity. The next few days rolled by in a reflective haze. I felt lighter in my interactions, as if I was shedding some skin. At work, I found myself speaking up in meetings where I might have let others dominate. I would joke about it to myself, saying, hey, if I can say no to an awkward lap ride, I can definitely voice my ideas. My coworkers laughed, likely thinking I was just being quirky, but for me, it was a reinvention. The incident became a quiet but significant marker, a reminder of what it meant to assert myself. Later that week, I bumped into Mark. At a coffee shop. He was already at a table, scrolling through his phone, when I walked in. The first thing I noticed was the stiffening of his posture as our eyes met. Part of me wanted to walk over, to clear the air, but another part, the braver part, told me to just grab my coffee and be on my way. As I stood in line, I debated my next steps. Should I confront him? Apologize for being rude, or better yet, should I inquire about his reaction? I certainly wanted to know if he regretted it, or if he still felt I had overstepped by turning him down. In that moment of indecision, as I waited for my soy latte, my phone buzzed with a message. It was from Sarah, my close friend who had backed me up that night. How are you holding up? I know things got weird with Mark. Let's talk. I smiled, that little flutter of warmth igniting inside again. I shot her a quick reply, reassuring her I was fine and would love to chat. It was strange how one experience could ripple through various aspects of your life, redefining friendships, shifting dynamics. Later that afternoon, after what felt like a caffeine-fueled confession with Sarah, I learned that Mark had been taken aback by my decision, less about my refusal to sit on his lap and more about the way I articulated my feelings. He said something about respect, Sarah recalled. It struck me as comical how he had made a big deal out of a small snub, but there was a grain of truth in it, a lesson for him, maybe. Days turned into weeks, and though I hadn't spoken to Mark since that coffee shop encounter, I noticed a change in him. He approached our mutual friends, started conversations with my name embroidered on a few hesitant apologies that slipped out during group outings. I would hear snippets, vague admissions that felt like half-baked attempts to rewrite our shared narrative. It didn't matter to me as much as it had. I felt grounded, unfazed by his need for validation. Looking out my window as the city hummed below, I realized that this experience, that simple Uber ride home, had opened something within me. I was more attuned to how I felt in various situations, and how I didn't have to adjust myself just to fit someone else's frame. It was then that I understood, some lessons come wrapped in unconventional packages, and sometimes a night of awkwardness can lead to unexpected revelations about who we are and who we choose to become. So, no, I wasn't the asshole, but part of me knew that this was only the tip of the iceberg. I would encounter moments like this again, tiny crossroads where comfort and courage met. Each decision carving out a little more space for the authentic me to thrive. And maybe, just maybe, that was the greatest victory of all. I never thought a simple name could create such a rift in my relationship, but here I am, standing at the crossroads of family dynamics and the yearning for self-identity. My name is Mia, a perfectly ordinary name that I've carried my whole life, yet somehow, my boyfriend's mom insists on calling me Princess. I know, right? It sounds adorable, maybe even endearing at first, but let me tell you, it rubbed me the wrong way. I mean, I'm all for playful nicknames, but there's something about being labeled as a princess that felt patronizing, especially coming from a woman I was supposed to impress. The first time I met Beth, Scott's mom, I walked into their cozy living room, filled with laughter and the smell of her famous lasagna. Scott introduced me, and she looked me up and down, beaming, and said, "Welcome, Princess. You must be the one who stole my son's heart." I laughed, played along, hoping this was just a passing fluke of warmth. But it stuck. Over dinner, she didn't falter, addressing me as Princess every chance she got, even as I self-deprecatingly corrected her, "Just Mia is fine." But the more I said it, the more she smiled as though I were merely being modest. It became this strange game, this insistence on seeing me through a lens that didn't feel like me at all. Fast forward to a couple of months later, and I finally reached my boiling point. It was a chilly Friday night, and I was about to join Scott and his mom for some takeout. As soon as I walked in, Beth turned her head, and with that wide grin, she exclaimed, "Hello, Princess. Ready for a royal feast?" I felt my stomach clench. My heart raced, It's not like I wanted to confront her, but something in me snapped. Can you please just call me Mia? The kitchen fell silent. Scott's fork paused mid-air, and his eyes were wide, as if I'd set off fireworks in the middle of a library. Beth's expression shifted from surprise to confusion, and then, slowly, to hurt. Oh dear, I thought you liked it. I thought it was cute. She trailed off. My heart sank. I didn't want to hurt her feelings. But I felt so invisible, like I was wrapped in this blanket of a persona that wasn't mine. I took a deep breath, bracing myself. I appreciate that you mean well, but it's just not me. I'm not a princess, I'm just Mia. And I want to be seen as me. I could feel the tension crackling in the air, a suffocating silence overshadowing the warm aroma of the lasagna. Scott shifted uncomfortably, and I could tell he was caught in the middle. He sighed, Mom, I think Mia is just trying to make her own space in our lives. The moment hung heavy between us until finally, after what felt like an eternity, Beth let out a gentle sigh. I'm sorry, dear. I didn't mean to make you uncomfortable. I'll call you Mia from now on. Relief washed over me, but then guilt sank in. Was I too harsh? Had I robbed her of her fun? Later that night, as Scott and I lay in bed, I whispered, Do you think I overreacted? He turned to me, brushing my hair back gently. No, you needed to speak up. It's part of who you are. I love you for being authentic. I closed my eyes, accepting that love sometimes requires discomfort. I still felt a bit unsettled about how things would change between Beth and me, but I hoped this was the starting point for a more honest relationship. A week later, as we gathered for a family game night, I nervously walked in, stealing a glance at Beth. I braced myself for another princess, but instead, she looked up, smiled gently, and said, Hey, Mia. Ready to kick some butt at Uno? I smiled, feeling a surge of warmth. Maybe this was the bridge we needed in a relationship that could thrive on authenticity. In the end, I realized that asking to be called by my own name wasn't about being a diva, it was about claiming my identity. As I slipped into the familiar rhythm of laughter and light-hearted banter, I understood that sometimes, standing firm is what allows us to grow closer. In that moment, surrounded by the colorful cards and the comfortable smell of popcorn floating through the air, I felt a surprising sense of relief wash over me. Sure, there was an awkwardness that still lingered from my last confrontation with Beth, the way her face had hardened, if only for a moment, when I first brought up the whole Princess Mia situation, but now that felt like a small bump in the road compared to the joy of playing with my boyfriend, Jake, and his mom. As we began our game, I could feel the tension ease, replaced by the playful competition that made family game nights both charming and exasperating in equal measure. With each round, I caught myself stealing glances at Beth, who was animatedly counting her cards, her laughter ringing out with each draw that wasn't what she'd hoped for. I marveled at how her jovial nature seemed to melt any lingering awkwardness I had been carrying. How about a little wager? I suggested, half joking, as I threw down a wild card and let the red skip across the table. Loser does the dishes. Beth raised an eyebrow, the competitive spark igniting in her eyes. You're on, girl. The energy fizzed between us as we rallied to see who'd end the night victorious, whether it was my careful strategy or Beth's exuberance that took the win. I forgot momentarily about the years and expectations that often hung uncomfortably between us. Yet, still, the question of my identity lingered in the back of my mind. I thought back to that uneasy conversation in the kitchen just a week ago, where I had hesitated, yet ultimately decided to stand up for myself. I'd never wanted to be confrontational, but being called princess felt like I was being funneled into a box that didn't fit. As much as I appreciated all the love Beth had poured into making Jake into the wonderful person he was, I was my own person, and that deserved to be recognized. As the night wore on, something seemed to shift in Beth's demeanor too. She started to share more stories about Jake's childhood, how he'd once spent a summer building a treehouse in their backyard and how he had stubbornly insisted on decorating it with stars and a neon green paint that he'd picked himself. Hearing these anecdotes not only brought me closer to Jake, they lured me into Beth's world, deepening our connection. After a few rounds, Beth laid her cards down with a flourish and looked straight at me, determination etched across her face. All right, Mia, she began, the tender lilt of her voice interrupting my thoughts. I think we need to have a real talk. My heart sank a little. Had I overstepped after all? Was it too soon? Let's do it, I replied, summoning my courage. She smiled again, but this time there was a vulnerability beneath the surface. I know I can be a bit old-fashioned, and princess was just how I thought I was connecting with you. I truly care about you, so I'm sorry if it's made you feel uncomfortable." The words hung in the air, and in that charged silence, I realized we were both learning in that moment. "I appreciate that, Beth," I said, feeling a swell of warmth toward her. "I really do value our relationship. I just want you to know the real me, Mia, who's not just Jake's girlfriend but someone you can let into your heart, too." Her eyes softened as she nodded, and a new understanding blossomed between us. "Then let's figure that out. Call me whatever you want, just as long as it sounds like we're a family, growing together." I've often noticed how the most awkward moments in life can blossom into the most beautiful connections if we allow ourselves to address them with honesty. As the evening came to a close and we both recognized the earlier tension had melted away, I couldn't help but reflect on how freeing it felt to claim my identity not just in front of Beth but also for myself. Later that evening, as I headed to the door, Jake wrapped his arm around my shoulder. "I saw that," he said with a teasing grin, "the way you two were just vibing. I'm so proud of you." I squeezed his hand, and the warmth of the night lingered in my heart. "Thanks, Jake. I think we're getting somewhere." Even as I walked away from the house, I understood that family dynamics could be messy. They could get bruised but also healed in ways I never anticipated, sometimes just by the act of speaking your truth. As I walked down the familiar path leading to Jake's car, my heart beat with a mix of excitement and anxiety. The stars twinkled in the cool night sky, each one a little affirmation of the night's progress. "You know," I said, breaking the silence as Jake opened the door for me, "I didn't realize how important that moment with Beth was until it happened." He settled into the driver's seat, glancing at me with curious eyes, his fingers tapping lightly against the steering wheel. "What do you mean?" I leaned back, trying to articulate the storm of emotions swirling inside me. "It's not just about her calling me Mia," I continued, hesitating just enough that I could capture the weight of my words. "It's about being seen. I've felt like a ghost in this relationship with her, like I'm just Jake's girlfriend, you know?" Jake nodded slowly, his expression softening. "I get it. You're more than just that title." The way he said it made my heart flutter, and for once, I felt relieved rather than anxious. "Yeah, and it made me realize, if I don't speak up for my identity, who will? I want her to know me as I am, not as she wishes I'd be." The drive felt like a blur, a soothing rhythm of tires on pavement, but my mind raced with thoughts about what lay ahead. Would Beth continue to call me Mia? Would she embrace this side of me that I was beginning to embrace myself? I tried to play it all out in my head, planning for every possible outcome, but each time I spiraled down a potential avenue, I tugged my thoughts back to the moment we had shared over Uno. We arrived at Jake's apartment, and as he opened the door, I followed him into the softly lit space, filled with the scent of his aftershave mixed with the faint aroma of leftover pizza. He turned to me with a playful smile. "Want to play a round of something? Or maybe just talk about your epic Uno strategy?" I laughed, letting the humor cut through the lingering tension. "Let's save the games for tomorrow, but I could definitely use a little unpacking of feelings tonight." I flopped onto the couch, feeling like with each word, I was unzipping a hidden compartment within myself. As the night stretched on, we talked about everything, about my work, my dreams, and of course, Jake's mom, and I could feel every layer of that emotional wall I'd built starting to dissolve. "You know," he said thoughtfully, "Beth can be a little tough, but maybe what you did today is what she needs to really get to know you. Sometimes it takes a little push." His words resonated with me, echoing in the corners of my mind. I thought back to all the family dinners where I felt some version of myself being misplaced. But speaking up had planted a seed. Maybe, just maybe, standing my ground would help both me and Beth grow closer as a family. "Maybe I'll bake her some muffins or something the next time I see her," I mused out loud. "Something safe and comforting, like a peace offering." Jake chuckled softly, the sound warm and friendly, like a cozy blanket wrapping around my worries. "You'd bake? I must record this monumental occasion." I rolled my eyes, but the laughter that bubbled to the surface felt genuine, washing over the remnants of yesterday's uncertainty. By the time we settled in, I felt a sense of calm enveloping me. The evening had turned out to be more than just a game, it was an invitation to foster understanding and acceptance. As we talked and laughed late into the night, I realized I was finally shaping the narrative of who I was, actively weaving my identity into the fabric of relationships that meant the most to me. Whether it was with Jake, Beth, or even myself, I was starting to own my story. As sleep pulled me away, I closed my eyes thinking of the possibilities and the small steps ahead. Who knew that a name could open so many doors? For now, I felt peace, accompanied by the gentle heartbeat of a new chapter just beginning. I sat on our faded couch, the kind that had seen better days, staring blankly at the coffee table littered with wedding invitations. My husband, Kyle, had just received one from his sister, and the moment he read the name of the venue, the same place where we'd had our own wedding, the nostalgia washed over me like a tidal wave. But it quickly faded, replaced by an unsettling rush of anxiety. You see, Kyle hadn't spoken to his sister in 2 years. It wasn't one of those petty squabbles that could be brushed aside. It was a feud that began when she belittled our decision to have a child early in our marriage, telling us we were ruining our lives. The words had cut deep, especially because I had struggled with infertility and felt vulnerable in ways I couldn't vocalize. Now, here we were, standing on the precipice of a decision that made my stomach churn. As I watched him thumb through the invitation, I felt this surge of protectiveness rising within me. I knew that if he went, there was a good chance it would escalate into something ugly, and I didn't want to see him hurt again. I hesitated, then finally voiced my concern, choosing my words carefully. "Are you really planning on going?" I asked, trying to gauge his intentions. His expression shifted from excitement to uncertainty, and for a split second, I saw the flicker of ambivalence play across his face, a battle between the desire to reconcile and the fear of rejection that had haunted him for years. I took a breath and laid out my feelings, layering them with severity. He needed to understand that inviting old wounds to a celebration might not be as festive as it seemed. His eyes narrowed, a shadow of disappointment shadowed his features. "So, you want me to just stay home? Don't you want me to try?" The tension thickened in the air, I felt it tightening around us like a noose. I took a moment, biting my lip, knowing I had to be careful. "It's not just about you, Kyle. It's about protecting what we've built together. You can't just walk back into her life as if nothing happened, and I don't want to be there when it all falls apart." The room filled with a heavy silence, punctuated only by the ticking of the clock on the wall. I could read his frustration in the way his fingers tapped nervously against the armrest, and it killed me. I never wanted to feel like the villain in this story. I worried that by suggesting he shouldn't go, I was shoving him into a corner, making him choose between family and our life together. It was a painful realization, but the possibility of joy turning into chaos loomed larger than any hope of reconciliation. After a long pause, Kyle finally stood up, the invitation still clutched in his hand, and I watched him walk over to the window, staring out at the street below as if trying to find answers in the mundane world outside. I felt a pang of guilt. Was I really the one keeping him from healing? Or was I merely preserving the peace we had fought so hard to achieve? The truth is, there was no clear answer. In the end, he decided not to go, a choice I silently hoped had been for the best, even if it meant reducing his relationship with his sister to a flickering flame instead of a raging fire. This decision hung over us for weeks, and while it seemed right at the time, it brought a fresh wave of uncertainty. Had I done the right thing? I wished for the distance between him and his sister to dissolve, if only they could talk openly, if only she could see him for who he was now. A few days later, we received a phone call from her. Kyle answered with a mix of hope and trepidation, and I could hear her voice on the other end, barely above a whisper. I held my breath, wishing I could take the weight of this moment away from him. It turned into a long conversation, one I eavesdropped on while pretending to be busy in the kitchen. He was answering her questions cautiously, articulating the hurt without putting blame. When he finally hung up, his eyes were a mixture of relief and residual hurt. "We're going to try again," he said, and I smiled, not because the resolution was solid but because there was a glimmer of hope we hadn't foreseen. With every turn, every moment spent grappling with complex emotions, I realized love isn't just about the easy choices but also about the difficult conversations. A few weeks later, he joined me at the table while I was sorting the wedding invites again. "I think we should go to the wedding," he said softly, and panic flared in my chest. I didn't respond right away. Was I really okay with this? The truth is, I had no idea what the right answer was, but I knew it was a path we'd have to navigate together, no matter how thorny it might be. For what felt like an eternity, I stared at the wedding invites scattered across the table like a map to uncharted territory. Each envelope seemed to pulse with unvoiced questions and unacknowledged tensions, echoing the scramble of my thoughts. "Go to the wedding?" I murmured, trying to keep my voice steady despite the whirl of emotions churning inside me. In my mind, I could hear the punctuated laughter of my sister-in-law, Jessica, as I remembered last Thanksgiving, when the family had gathered together, and the warmth of those moments contrasted sharply with the chill that seemed to hang over everything since her engagement. She had never liked me, and I certainly hadn't warmed up to her. My husband, Daniel, had always been the centerpiece of that family, towering tall and sunny, expertly navigating the waves of familial drama with grace. And now, here we were. You know, they'll probably all side with her, I said, the weight of my concern sinking into the space between us. They'll think I'm just being difficult, as usual. What if we don't go and it pushes you further away from them? He sighed, running a hand through his hair, a gesture I had come to identify with his frustration. Maybe it's time to confront all that. You're not difficult for wanting to protect your peace. Protect my peace? I'm not some damsel in distress. The echoes of fighting for my own self-worth danced in my mind, and I hesitated, staring down at the invites again. This wasn't just about a single day, it was about the larger conversation of who we were becoming, together and apart. I felt the moment catch in my throat, the vulnerability hammering at my walls. What happens when you love someone but also know their family, and their history, could drown you in a sea of tides you couldn't escape? I just want us to be okay, I finally whispered, my heart heavy with doubt. Daniel's expression softened, and in those quiet seconds, I could see the boy who first kissed me under the stars, that same ember of hope flickering in his eyes. We will be. Whatever happens, we'll face it together. The words wrapped around me, a fragile lifeline, and for an instant, I believed in them. But then, silence slipped in, thick and unyielding, filling the cracks of our conversation. The day of the wedding dawned with a mix of excitement and dread, clouds hung low in the sky, mirroring my uncertainty. As we dressed, I caught myself catching fleeting glimpses of Daniel, adorned in a suit that brought out the shine in his eyes. It was familiar yet filled with an edge of anxiety. I wondered, was he wearing it for them or for us? When we finally arrived at the venue, the air grew heavy with the scent of blooming flowers and inevitable conflict. Jessica was radiant, a knockout in ivory, and even through my resentment, I could feel the magnetic energy she exuded. As I stepped inside, the room seemed to spin. I could see the waves of family swirling around Daniel, pulling him into the currents of chatter. Each hug felt like a mugging, the warmth that enveloped him stealing pieces of the man I loved. You made it. One of her relatives exclaimed, and I could tell the words were coated with a hint of surprise. The judgment was palpable, I could feel it prickling against my skin. I held my breath, fighting the urge to turn and flee. I lingered at the edges, watching Daniel greet family members with his disarming charm, but I felt like a ghost haunting the edges of his life. It was only a tentative hey from Jessica when she caught sight of me that anchored me back into reality. Glad you came, she said, her smile tight and rehearsed, a contrast to the joyous atmosphere surrounding her. I nodded, feeling every moment stinging. Just when I was about to retreat to the bar, Daniel's laughter cut through the noise, a warm ember in the chilly distance. I stepped forward instinctively, drowning my insecurities in that familiar sound. The evening unfolded like a slow, painful dance, each conversation felt like a tightrope walk, balanced between civility and rising tension. I could see Daniel start to look wearier as the hours ticked by, and I wondered if he, too, felt the weight of unspoken words hanging heavy in the air. Eventually, he found me by the appetizer table, his eyes searching mine for solace. Let's step outside, he suggested, and his voice was firm, like a lifebuoy in a storm. We walked into the cool evening, the world outside humming softly, and I felt my shoulders drop just a bit. I don't want to keep feeling like this, he confessed, hands tucked into his pockets, staring at the ground. Being here, it's exhausting. My heart quickened. So, what do we do about that? I asked, feeling both terrified and relieved at the possibility of us figuring this out together. Our eyes locked, and for a moment, the chaos of the wedding faded into the background. I guess we just need to make sure we don't lose what we've built, he said, his tone rich with resolve. The wedding buzzed behind us, merging into a muffled noise as I grasped the gravity of his words. We were two ships navigating our way through a stormy sea of familial expectations, and I couldn't help but feel hope blooming between us like wildflowers through a crack in the pavement. As the night unfolded, we exchanged glances and quiet smiles, little reminders that we had each other's backs. I still wasn't sure what the future held for us or how our relationship with Jessica would settle, but I knew that we'd face it side by side. I felt that old familiar warmth during the highs and gathered strength through the lows, knowing I could lean on him. Whatever we faced next, it was no longer just about a wedding, it was about us, and we were determined to weather the storm together. The weeks leading up to the wedding felt like a slow unraveling of both my anxiety and a tightening embrace of hope. Andy and I spent countless evenings discussing how to approach Jessica and her family, who traditionally wreathed their gatherings in an air of perfection. I often found myself lost in thought, worrying about every possible scenario. Would they even accept our presence after everything? Would he apologize and then be surprised by my hesitance? Nearly every night, I'd stare at the stars outside our window, trying to find answers in their distant flickers. Despite all the chaos, we managed to carve out moments of sheer joy amid the uncertainty. One Saturday, we decided to go on an impromptu hike, a little trail leading to a view we'd stumbled upon during one of our earlier adventures. There, on that sun-drenched mountaintop, it felt like our worries didn't matter quite as much. We laughed as we recounted the time we got lost for hours during a camping trip. He grinned, the way he always did when he was being playful, and nudged me, reminding me he would always choose me over getting lost, even if it meant wandering off the path sometimes. Together, right? He asked, a spark of purpose filling his gaze. Always, I assured him, even as my heart fluttered with the weight of the journey ahead. When the wedding weekend finally arrived, anxiety slithered back into my mind, weaving itself around my thoughts like a vine. I spent the morning getting ready, choosing a dress that felt right, not too elaborate, just enough to reflect my genuine self. In the mirror, I didn't quite recognize the woman looking back at me. She seemed so resolute yet fragile, a juxtaposition that mirrored the entire situation at hand. I felt the gravel of apprehension in my throat as we made our way to the venue, Andy's hand warm in mine, grounding me amidst my swirling thoughts. As we stepped into the extravagant hall filled with laughter and happiness, I could feel the tension coiling tight within me. Andy and I exchanged small talk about the decorations, the floral arrangements bursting with color that made everything feel vibrant, yet every cheerful sound felt like it was humming with an undercurrent of dread. We shared a few awkward smiles with family members who seemed blissfully unaware of the backstory. And there was Jessica, radiant and graceful, a fairy tale figure enveloped in a gown. My heart softened for a split second, until reality nudged me back awake. It was still a wedding marred by complexities. Before long, Jessica caught sight of us. Her expression shifted, and for just a heartbeat, I saw the flicker of worry dance across her features. But she turned her head away quickly, adjusting her attention to a friend beside her. My heart sank for both of us. She had a lot on her mind, and I knew our past might become an unwanted guest at this celebration. I glanced at Andy, who was watching me closely, and I decided to breathe through the moment. "We'll be okay, right?" I whispered, even though I was unsure myself. He nodded, determination lighting up his eyes, as if to say that we were in this together despite the storm brewing around us. As the night unfolded, we shared glances, laughter, and moments that made me realize how deeply we were connected. Our table found itself surrounded by family that was surprisingly warm and welcoming. A cousin of ours asked about how we'd been, easing me back into comfortable conversation. I felt a smile tugging at my lips as I recalled our recent adventures, the way Andy rolled his eyes good-naturedly when I dragged him to yet another gallery exhibit. Yet somewhere in the back of my mind, Jessica lingered like the ghost of unspoken words. Then it happened. Midway through dinner, Andy excused himself to head to the restroom. I hadn't meant to, but my eyes sought out Jessica across the room, and to my surprise, she was looking at me. Caught in that moment, I felt something shift, something different from before. No anger, just a curiously soft vulnerability. Perhaps we could bridge this gap. With hesitant steps, I made my way through the crowd, threading between joyful laughter and sweet reminiscences. "Jessica," I said softly when I finally stood in front of her, "can we talk?" Her smile faltered for an instant, but she nodded, the two of us moving away from the merriment. I could sense the weight of this moment, how years of tension coiled around us, waiting for an opening. "I didn't expect you guys to come," she said, the warmth in her tone stripped back, revealing an edge of something I couldn't quite identify. Did she feel trapped by our past? "Yeah, well, neither did we," I admitted, a nervous laugh slipping out. "But here we are. Together." The honesty in my voice felt like a lifeline thrown across treacherous waters. It's not that I don't care about you both. It's complicated," she murmured, her eyes locking onto mine, vulnerability spilling out in waves. We stood there for a moment surrounded by distant laughter, two estranged sisters-in-law searching for a thread of connection amidst a tapestry of family history. In those seconds, I realized that this was the start, not just for her, but for us. It wasn't about solving everything in a single conversation. It was about acknowledging our shared past, our painful scars, and learning to move forward, slowly but surely. No matter how clumsy it felt, we could try. "Complicated is okay," I said, almost surprised by my own words. "What's important is what we choose to do next." For a moment, it was just silence between us, more welcoming than an embrace. And as she nodded, I felt a cautious yet promising warmth begin to bloom in that space, like the first signs of spring pushing their way through a winter-frosted earth. Whatever happened next would be fraught with challenges, but Andy and I had already navigated this intricate path. All we needed was faith in the footsteps ahead of us. And in that warm ambience enveloped by festivity, I believed we might just find our way towards healing together. I never thought I'd find myself in a situation where I'd be questioning if I was the asshole for not reminding my fiance that stoves are hot, but here we are. It was one of those typical Sunday afternoons, the kind where the sun spills in through the kitchen window, taunting me with warmth while I stood at the cluttered counter, trying to whip up something decent for dinner. I was juggling ingredients and listening to my fiance, Tom, talk about his day, his voice fading in and out as I focused on slicing vegetables. Tom is the kind of guy who's enticed by a good recipe, except that he hasn't quite grasped the unspoken rules of culinary safety, specifically when it comes to the stove. It might sound petty, but I really thought he was old enough to know better. We've lived together for almost 3 years, and I've certainly burned myself enough times to have learned to be careful. I could feel the heat wafting from the burners, and as I glanced over my shoulder, I saw Tom standing too close to the stove, engrossed in a video on his phone about some gaming news. I remember thinking, he knows stoves are hot. My heart sank when I heard a sudden hiss, the sound of bacon grease meeting an exposed burner. In a split second, he pulled his hand back from the hot pan, yelping as he danced back like a toddler who just discovered a sea of lava. The moment felt like it unfolded in slow motion, the shock on his face, the way he shook his hand in disbelief, and the acrid smell of scorched skin starting to mingle with the savory aroma of dinner. I rushed over, my heart racing, both embarrassment and guilt seeping through me as I skated between irritation and concern. I mean, I knew I should have said something, right? But part of me thought he'd get it by now. Later that night, while I was dabbing ointment on his blistered skin, I tried to tease it away, saying something like, "You know, I did think about reminding you." Tom laughed, but it was that half-hearted kind of laugh, the one that told me he wasn't really finding it funny. "Maybe next time, you could actually remind me," he shot back, a playful spark in his eyes, but the undercurrent of annoyance was unmistakable. I grumbled something about how I didn't want to treat him like a kid who needed constant supervision, but deep down, I felt that creeping sense of guilt. Was I supposed to remind him about everything? A part of me wanted him to figure it out, to learn through his own mistakes. But I couldn't shake the feeling that maybe I had failed him somehow. Getting into bed that night, I stared at the ceiling, the shadows whispering my doubts back to me. Am I the asshole for letting him learn this lesson the hard way, or should I have recognized the potential for disaster before it even happened? The thoughts spiraled in my head. I felt exhausted. Should I have coddled him, or does that just breed dependency? Days turned into weeks, and while Tom's burn healed, the tension felt unresolved. I would catch him stealing glances at the stove, then avoiding it like it was the plague. I could see he was frustrated with himself, and sometimes I wondered if I needed to provide that level of reassurance he sought. Maybe it was the kids' show we just binge-watched, but there was something unsettling about waiting for him to catch fire literally or figuratively. Eventually, I brought it up during a quiet lunch date. "You know, I didn't mean to imply I wouldn't remind you. I just thought you'd know on your own." I barely recognized the nervousness creeping into my own voice. Tom looked at me, his brow furrowed like he was struggling to figure something out. I guess I thought that too, but I still end up doing dumb stuff. It's like walking into a wall when you're distracted. His vulnerability caught me by surprise. We ended up sharing a laugh, easing the tension between us as we agreed maybe a reminder every now and then wouldn't hurt. It wasn't about being infantilized, but more about nurturing each other as we learned together. That felt like a step toward a stronger partnership, and as we cleaned up those last few moments together, I realized it wasn't about who was right or wrong, it was about how we navigated through those moments as one. So, was I the asshole? Maybe, but we had each owned our share of the lesson, and in the end, we grew a little closer because of it. As I washed the last pot, the warmth of those shared moments lingered in the air like the scent of garlic and thyme we'd used in our dinner. The lessons from the evening, those little nudges toward a deeper understanding, felt more sacred than the burned skin that would heal in time. I glanced over at Alex, carefully drying the plates, his brow furrowed in concentration. I recalled the tension from earlier, the thick silence that had filled our small kitchen when I could see the anger flash in his eyes after he accidentally brushed against the stove. I had been brushing my own hands against my apron, fully aware of the burn risk and completely unprepared for the sudden frustration that erupted between us. "Why didn't you say anything?" he had snapped, his voice sharp and raw, filled with that mix of hurt and defensiveness that only surfaces when you feel vulnerable. I winced at the memory, the way his words had cut through the air, as much of a burn as the one on his wrist. But here we were now, laughter creeping back as we joked about the overly ambitious meal I'd tried to prepare. Next time, we just order pizza, I smirked, nudging his side playfully with my hip, and the tension melted a bit more. Because the truth was, I had worried about reminding him of the obvious. I had felt like a schoolteacher, a role neither of us wanted to slip into. I breathed in deeply, letting the scent of the soap and water soothe away the earlier unease. With every dish placed in its rightful cabinet, I was reminded that love isn't just about the beautiful moments, it's also about navigating the bumps and bruises together. That kind of partnership required a blend of trust and patience, where we could admit our faults without fear of being judged as incompetent. When he turned to me and offered a slight smile, I felt a pang of gratitude wash over me. "You know," he said softly, "I appreciate you. I don't always think about the obvious stuff, and sometimes I might even think I'm above reminders." I nodded, the words hanging between us like a delicate thread, as we stood in our imperfect kitchen doing our best to create a life together. "I'm here to remind you, but I won't make it a habit to be your alarm," I teased, and we both chuckled, relief flooding back in as I felt the weight of the day lift ever so slightly. I knew we'd have our share of misunderstandings, but maybe there was beauty in that chaos too. Would I be the perfect partner? Not a chance. But would I be there, paddling alongside him as we both tried to find our balance? Absolutely. And as we finally finished up, I glanced at the stove, still off, thankfully, and wondered how many more lessons waited for us in the future. It felt oddly comforting, this path we were carving out, uncertain yet ours. Maybe I did have some faults, but those didn't define our journey together, they merely added depth to it, guiding us toward the next meal, metaphorically and literally. That evening lingered in the air, a strange mix of tension and relief, both of us grappling with the warmth of the kitchen that had witnessed our little storm. As I washed the last dish, bubbles rising and popping in the soapy water, I felt Jacob's presence just behind me, his breath steady and comforting. "I'm really sorry about earlier," he said, his voice softer than I had heard in a while. "I hate that it escalated like that." I turned, meeting his gaze, and saw a flicker of vulnerability there. "I get it, we're both learning," I replied, trying to convey that I understood it wasn't just him. He offered a half smile, and something about it reminded me of all the shared moments we'd had, not just the disagreements. The late-night ice cream runs, the spontaneous kitchen dance parties, and even the marathon binge-watching sessions that sometimes turned into long conversations about our dreams. "I guess we're still growing together," he murmured, and his words set off a sweet flood of recognition in me. It was so easy to focus on the stormy parts of our relationship, but here we were, carving out our space to be imperfect together. I wiped my hands dry and took a moment to really look at him, the way his brow furrowed in thought, the way he absently tucked a loose curl behind his ear. "And we can remind each other about the hot stove, right?" I teased lightly, trying to bring back the levity we both needed. He laughed, a genuine, bright laugh that still echoed in the corners of the room, and I felt the tension fade a little more. "Deal. Just promise you'll remind me about the knives too, I'm the one always cutting myself," he joked back, and it felt like we had just forged an unspoken pact. We began packing away the leftover ingredients, and as I handed him a container, our fingers brushed, igniting an electric sweetness that sent a shiver down my spine. Moments like these felt more nourishing than the food we were preparing. I think it was in our shared laughter, our playful nudges against each other, and the small, everyday acknowledgments where quiet love really resided. Later, as we settled onto the couch, plates of dinner resting on our laps, I could hear the comforting hum of the world outside. The window was slightly ajar, letting in the cool evening breeze, and I felt alive in that moment, aware of how easily things could slip back into chaos. "What if we make a habit out of cooking together? Like a weekly thing?" I proposed, and Jacob pondered. "Yeah, that sounds great. But we should probably write down a safety checklist first," he joked again, his playful approach making it easier to imagine our future kitchen escapades. So, we started mapping out our weeks over dinner, Tuesday taco nights, Friday pizza parties. It felt like a plan to fortify ourselves against future mishaps. All the while, I noticed the way his excitement bubbled through, and I couldn't help but smile at how far we'd come in just that one day. As we leaned over the table, tracing a layout of ingredients and ideas, I was struck by a thought. Life would never stop throwing challenges our way, but maybe, just maybe, those very challenges were what would draw us closer. And so, as we settled into the couch's plush embrace, my heart brimmed with hope. Lessons would come, and sometimes they might burn, just like that stove. But I knew we'd learn to navigate it together, to build our little fortress of understanding and compassion, one dish at a time. The beauty of partnership is not about being flawless, it's about embracing our imperfections and finding joy in the space between. It was one of those Saturday afternoons where the sun seemed to hang a little lower in the sky, bathing everything in a warm golden light. I was just wrapping up my shift at the local diner, exhausted but oddly content. I had spent the day serving coffee and pancakes to the usual crowd, a familiar mix of regulars and unfamiliar faces. As I tossed my apron aside and climbed into my old truck, the smell of grease and syrup lingered, a strange comfort after a long shift. My plan was simple. A quick trip to the recycling center with a collection of cans I had saved up. I didn't think much of it, a handful of aluminum from my kitchen and the diner combined, a tiny contribution to my Friday night cleanup ritual. But as I parked in front of the recycling center, I noticed a woman standing by my truck, her eyes darting around like a squirrel on caffeine. Maybe it was the weariness of the day, or perhaps a rush of instinct, but something about her felt off. Still, I brushed it aside, pulled out my phone to scroll mindlessly through social media while I waited. A few moments passed before I looked up to see her rummaging in the back of my truck, lifting the bag of cans as if it were the Holy Grail. My heart dropped. "Hey! What are you doing?" I yelled, more out of shock than anger. I should have just let it go, but something snapped inside me. Maybe it was the day overriding my sleep-deprived brain, but I jumped out of the truck, my feet hitting the pavement with purpose. "That's mine." I found myself standing there, half expecting her to drop the bag and flee. But she turned to face me, and that's when I noticed the lines on her face, the weariness in her eyes that mirrored my own. "It's just cans," she shrugged, her voice sharp yet tinged with an edge of desperation. I felt a rush of sympathy mingling with my anger. Maybe she was struggling, maybe these cans were worth more to her than to me. Yet I thought back to how hard I worked for those pennies, each can a testament to my efforts. "I get it," I said, softer now, trying to find common ground. "But they're mine. I need to take them to recycling." The tension in the air was palpable, like rubber bands stretched to their limit. For a moment, we both stood there, two strangers caught up in an unwinnable standoff. I wasn't a confrontational person by nature. I often preferred to drift through the world rather than disturb the status quo, but here I was, presenting a challenge. Something flickered in her eyes, a mixture of anger, shame, and maybe a hint of vulnerability. "This is how I pay for my kids' lunch," she blurted out, her voice cracking. My heart softened further, each beat echoing doubt in my mind. Was I an asshole for wanting to stand my ground? Was I denying her the means to survive? I took a deep breath and tried to rationalize it all. "I'm sure you're struggling. I get it. But I can't just give this to you." We hovered in this uncomfortable limbo, the weight of her desperation palpable. The bags of cans and my anger felt so trivial in the face of her honesty. I felt torn, split between being protective of my meager possessions and recognizing a need that resonated deep within my own heart. In a moment that felt like an eternity, I decided to compromise. "How about this? I'll help you gather more cans, and you can take any we find together. I could use an extra set of hands." The tension peaked for a split second, then slowly began to unravel. Her brow furrowed in disbelief as if trying to gauge my sincerity. "You wouldn't just call the cops?" she asked, her body relaxing but still cautious. I shook my head. "No, I won't. We're just two people trying to get by." In the end, we spent the next half hour combing through the neighborhood, collecting discarded cans. As we gathered our bounty, we talked. I learned her name was Maggie and that she was a single mother struggling to make ends meet. She was filled with laughter that sounded both weary and hopeful. I realized that my earlier irritation was so small compared to the stories people were carrying, including my own. When we finished, we looked at our small haul, and I dug into my pocket to pull out a $10 bill. "Here. Just for today," I said, feeling a warmth build in my chest. "This might not be much, but go buy those kids a few sandwiches." Maggie hesitated for a moment, then accepted the money, tears welling in her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered, and for the first time that day, I felt something within me lift, a sort of lightness that came from sharing the burden. I drove away that day with my heart heavier yet somehow also free, reflecting on how sometimes standing your ground could mean building a bridge instead. Months later, I still think about that afternoon. Did it fix everything? No. Did I get my cans back? Well, I learned to look beyond those cans for a moment, beyond possessions and comfort. I guess the world isn't just about fighting to protect what's yours. Sometimes, it's about recognizing what you can give up and seeing how far kindness can stretch, even if it comes from unexpected places. In a way, we both walked away with something that day, just not what we initially thought we needed. It's funny how life teaches you lessons in the most unpredictable ways. That day with the woman and my bag of cans shifted something deep within me, though the overt changes weren't immediate. I still had that tiny moment etched in my memory, the way her eyes briefly lit up when I handed her a couple of dollars, how taken aback she was when I told her to keep the cans. I had expected anger, had braced myself for her indignation when I confronted her about the theft, but the twist caught me off guard. Instead, I found a person who was just as lost in the world as I sometimes felt. It occurred to me that maybe what I saw as a desperate act of theft was part of a larger story I didn't know. I recalled her dirty hands, her weathered face, and the sadness that lingered like a shadow. As the weeks turned into months, I found myself reflecting on our encounter more often than I'd like to admit. Initially, I tried to justify my actions, clinging to my right to get my property back, convinced that I was in the right. But gradually, my grip on that sense of righteousness loosened. I would drive by the same corner where she had taken the cans, and I began to wonder about her life, who she was outside of that moment. Did she have friends? Was she okay? Occasionally, I'd see others like her, standing on the streets, carrying their circumstances like a heavy load, and I felt an urge to engage, to ask if they were all right. One night, on my way home from a late shift, I stopped at a local diner. It was nothing fancy but had decent burgers and endless coffee. As I was finishing my meal, a woman approached me, an all too familiar look in her eyes. It was her, the woman from the truck. My heart raced. She looked different, more alert, perhaps. I could see the scarring from whatever struggle she was battling, but there was also resilience in her expression. I wasn't sure if she recognized me, but I decided to take the leap. I smiled and said, "Hey, it's you. From the corner. With the cans." She blinked, a flash of recognition crossing her face before she hid it. "Yeah, I remember," she replied, a mix of pride and discomfort in her voice. I could sense the walls she'd built were still towering high. Yet, it didn't end there. We ended up talking for an hour over greasy fries, and I learned more about her circumstances than I anticipated. Her name was Rachel, and she had been struggling for years, trying to make ends meet in a world that kept kicking her when she was down. I shared bits about my life too, my own failures and frustrations, finding common threads of struggle and resilience that bridged the social gap between us. As we shared stories, I began to see humanity in Rachel, and she in me. What started as a moment of conflict turned into a profound connection. I was astonished at how little a person sometimes needs to feel heard. I offered her a few more dollars, insisting it was for a meal, nothing more, and she hesitated but took it. Our exchange felt interwoven with something rich and unspoken, the air humming with unacknowledged understanding. Months later, when I think about that day, I realize it was more than reclaiming my bag of cans or sorting out who was right or wrong. It had spiraled into something beautiful, showing me that sometimes standing your ground means building a bridge instead. I don't always see her, but whenever I do catch a glimpse of her, there's a nod of recognition that passes between us, a silent agreement grounded in empathy. It's strange how kindness can spread like ripples in a pond, starting from a simple act that feels so mundane in the grand scope of life. Little by little, I learned to look beyond possessions, and in doing so, I discovered the true essence of what it means to care for others, and that, perhaps, was the greatest reward of all. I still remember the first time I saw her again after that day by my truck. It was a rainy afternoon, the kind of day that pulls the colors out of the world, making everything look muted and gray. I was walking home from work, my mind tangled in thoughts about the week ahead, meetings that felt pointless and deadlines looming like storm clouds. Just as I turned the corner, I saw her huddled under a bus stop awning, the same worn-out jacket pulled tight around her shoulders. For a moment, I hesitated. Was she still that woman who had taken my bags of cans? I thought about the anger and fear that had welled up in me when I'd confronted her, how I had been ready to yell, ready to proclaim my territory. But now, as I stood there watching her count something in her lap, maybe a few stray coins, maybe hopes for the day, I felt that old tension fade away. Instead of crossing the street to avoid her, I walked closer. "Hey," I said, trying to sound casual, as if the weight of our previous encounter didn't hang in the air between us. She looked up, surprise flickering across her face. "I remember you." The way she said it sent a rush of unexpected warmth through me. I caught her eye and nodded. There was no animosity this time, only a shared moment that acknowledged our past. "What are you doing out here?" I asked, the rain drizzling down and inviting us both into a more intimate conversation. "Waiting for a friend," she replied, her voice sounding small yet steady. Not sure what I was thinking, honestly. I glanced at the bus schedule, then back at her. "Want to grab a coffee? There's a little place just down the street." She hesitated, biting her lip, and I could sense her internal struggle. This wasn't the typical interaction you'd have in a city, especially with someone you had a rocky history with. But she did something surprising. She nodded, and that felt like a bridge between us, even if it was fragile. As we settled into a small booth at the cafe, the scent of fresh brewing coffee wrapping around us, I learned her name, Maya. It turned out her world was much darker than I had guessed. She shared stories of losing a job and stumbling into hard times, realities that were stark and raw. I thought about the anger that had bubbled within me when she'd taken what was mine, completely ignorant of what was happening in her world. "Look, I know what I did was wrong," she said quietly, tracing the rim of her coffee cup with her finger, "but it wasn't just about the cans. I wasn't thinking straight. I was desperate." Her honesty hit me like a cold splash of water. I had spent most of my adult life pinching pennies, too, and it made me question how I would have reacted in her shoes. "What do you do when the world turns its back?" "I get it," I said slowly. "I really do. But there's no shame in asking for help." That seemed to resonate with her. We talked for hours, two people who had been strangers, now sharing bits and pieces of their lives over steaming mugs. She was funny and insightful, and I started to see the glimmer of hope in her eyes, a light that had been dimmed but wasn't entirely extinguished. By the time we parted ways, that nod I had used to recognize her before became a wave, an acknowledgement that we were both just trying to navigate our way through life's complications. In the months that followed, our encounters became more frequent. Sometimes she'd call if she needed a referral for a job. Other times, I'd see her at the same bus stop, and we'd share quick laughs about life's absurdities. It didn't always lead to deep conversations or outstretching help, but the familiarity felt comforting, a reminder that human connections could blossom from the most unexpected circumstances. Reflecting back on it all, I learned something critical: we all have our battles, our shabby jackets we wear to shield ourselves from the world. But maybe what makes our journeys worthwhile is not just the things we gather along the way, those cans, those ambitions, but the people we meet and the finite moments when we open ourselves to understanding. I never got those bags of cans back, but, honestly, I've come to realize that sometimes what you think you need pales in comparison to understanding someone else's struggle. We both gained something that day we stepped out from behind our defenses, and as I walked home that night feeling lighter, I knew that bridge between us was something I'd treasure far more than any material possession. I still remember the moment everything changed, the day I sat on my bed, scrolling through Instagram, when my mom knocked on my door. The look on her face told me this wasn't going to be a simple chat about dinner or my plans for the weekend. "Can we talk?" she asked, her voice smaller than I remembered. Instinctively, I felt my heart sink, and I gestured for her to sit beside me. I had no idea that the next few minutes would thrust me into a moral quandary that would shake my already wavering sense of loyalty to my family. Mom had been trying to hide her debt problem for a while, and though I suspected something was off as I watched her tense up during calls with bill collectors, it was still a jolt to hear her say it aloud: "I can't keep up with the payments anymore." Suddenly, my hard-earned college fund, something I had been saving for years, became the focal point of our conversation. "I need your help," she said, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. I felt a rush of love and a twinge of resentment. Honestly, it felt like I was being pulled into a whirlpool of guilt. I was just starting to map out my future, a future that I'd worked so hard for, fueled by the long hours at my part-time job and the sacrifices I made to save every penny. "Mom, my college fund is for my education," I stammered, trying to regain my composure. "It's not like I can just give it away." The room was thick with silence, and I could hear my own heartbeat thudding in my ears. It felt like a betrayal not just of my own dreams but of my own commitment to my future. I watched her face collapse, the mask of strength crumbling away to reveal the panic and desperation of a single parent. I admired her for standing up for us when things got tough, but I couldn't ignore that gnawing anxiety in my chest. Anxiety mixed with anger. Why didn't she reach out for help sooner? Doesn't a parent owe it to their kid to maintain stability for them? I didn't want to be selfish, but how could I compromise everything I wanted for what felt like a cycle of financial instability? I found myself replaying the moment over and over in my head, and each time, I felt that tug of war between love for my mom and my goals for myself. With time, I ultimately decided to turn her down. "I'm sorry, but I just can't do that," I said softly, shaking my head. The disappointment in her eyes left a cavern of regret in my stomach. The next few weeks felt heavy as silence filled our house, each day a reminder of my choice, a choice that felt a bit like tearing the fabric of our relationship. I immersed myself in my studies, trying to escape the tension, but those moments, her hopeful glance when I mentioned potential scholarships or her wistful comments about my college dreams, pierced through my efforts to keep both our worlds separate. As the months went by, our interactions became strained. Dad, who was more of a distant memory than a frequent presence, made things even murkier. He called one evening to check on us and inadvertently added fuel to the fire. "Your mother is just being stubborn," he said gruffly, dismissing her concerns. That small comment unleashed a tide of rage within me, forcing me to confront the reality that this wasn't just about money, it was about a family struggling to hold together the fragments of a life that hadn't turned out the way we all hoped. I started questioning everything, my choices, my future, even my feelings toward my mom. Was I the selfish kid who turned her back in a time of need? Or was I justified in protecting my dreams? Months later, around the time of my acceptance letters, I found myself seated at the kitchen table across from her, a stack of unopened envelopes piled between us. I got in, my voice was flat, lacking the excitement I should have felt. Instead of celebrating, we sat there as if burdened by unspoken words. Rather than the jubilant moment I imagined, it became a reminder of all that lay between us. "What are you going to do?" she asked, but it was more of a whisper, her vulnerability mirrored by her expression. I had an idea, a small flicker of hope amidst this despair, but I hesitated. "I want to go," I finally confessed, "but maybe I could help you with some of the bills. Just a little." For the first time, I saw a glimmer of pride in her eyes, mixed with the weariness of a mother who had already given so much. It wasn't a perfect solution, and it certainly didn't fix everything, but it was a start, a bridge on the shaky ground between us. I may have refused to give up my college fund, but in that moment, I chose to stand by her in a different way. I think, ultimately, we are all a mix of selfishness and selflessness, navigating the complexities of family and responsibility. I still don't know if I was the asshole or if I made the right choice, but I hold on to the belief that love, in its strangest forms, can sometimes redefine our paths in life. As I sit here now, watching the sun dip below the horizon, I realize that this story isn't just about money or a college fund. It's about understanding that sometimes, saying no doesn't mean you don't care, it means you're trying to find a way to care for each other, even when it feels like everything is falling apart. I remember the day it happened as if it were yesterday. My phone buzzed incessantly, that annoying ringtone piercing the stillness of my afternoon. I picked it up, expecting a text from my best friend about a new series we'd been binging, but it was my mom. "Just a few words at first, can we talk?" "Important." My stomach sank. Mom rarely asked to talk like that unless it was about something serious. I thought about the countless times I had mentally prepared myself to take on heavier burdens, but what she had to say caught me off guard. Sitting at my desk, surrounded by textbooks and half-finished assignments, I felt that familiar knot forming in my chest. When I called her back, her voice trembled. "I've been trying to figure things out with the bills, honey," she started, hesitating as if the words were hard to muster. I sensed where this was going, yet a part of me clung to hope. Maybe she just needed a little guidance, or there was a new job opportunity. But no, it was worse. She laid it all out, the debts, the missed payments, looming financial crises. I caught my breath at her mention of your college fund as though it were a mere line item on a spreadsheet, not the foundation of my future. I'd spent years planning, dreaming, hoping to leverage that tiny fund into something bigger. My heart raced with a mix of fear and anger, a swirling storm of emotions. Her voice softened as she continued, "I know it's a lot to ask, but I really need your help." I could almost visualize her, sitting in the dim light of our cramped living room, looking smaller than I remembered, trapped in a relentless cycle of regret. As guilt washed over me, I wanted to scream that she had promised me a better future, one she had dreamed for both of us. Yet the thought of abandonment also loomed large in my mind. After all, she had sacrificed so much for me. I couldn't just turn my back on her, but the thought of handing over my hard-working college savings twisted at my insides. Days passed, but the conversation lingered like an uninvited guest. I spoke to friends, tried to convince myself what the right choice was, but their well-meaning advice didn't help. "You're not an asshole for wanting a future for yourself," they'd say. Still, their words felt distant, hollow almost. I spent restless nights tossing and turning, images of my mother's face mixing with visions of my college dreams. I didn't want to be the villain in this story, nor did I want to sacrifice my aspirations to become a martyr. The night before our final conversation loomed over me, heavy and suffocating. I knew I couldn't keep swaying in indecision forever, the fear of making the wrong choice gnawed at me. That evening, I approached her, feeling dread ripple through my body. I can't give up my college fund, Mom. It's my future, my chance to break away from everything we've been through. Her eyes, those deep wells of emotion, held disbelief tinged with hurt, but I saw a glimpse of understanding there too. Perhaps she recognized the struggle in my heart, the battle of wanting to support her while needing to build my life. After a silence that felt like an eternity, she finally nodded. I see. It's your choice to make, and I don't want to take that from you. I watched her retreat into her thoughts, the weight of this decision settling heavily between us, both of us unsure of how to navigate the aftermath. As I reflect now, unsure if I did the right thing, the sunset seems to echo my internal struggle, the radiant colors a reminder that endings can also be beautiful beginnings. I can't say if I'll ever shake that sense of guilt, wondering if love and sacrifice can ever truly coexist without tearing one apart. A few months later, after diligently working part-time and focusing on my classes, I noticed a change in my mother. Instead of spending sleepless nights worrying over debts, she started taking control, searching for new jobs, attending workshops, connecting with others who could elevate her career. It was slow, but I could see hope creeping back into her life. In moments of doubt, I found myself revisiting that conversation, how it unfolded and morphed into something unforeseen. I learned that even in moments laden with tension, there is a possibility for growth, for both my mother and me. Realizing that love manifests differently for each of us gives me solace. What we desire can shift, turn, and evolve, just as we do. So no, I may never stop wondering if perhaps I was the asshole back then, but I'm slowly starting to understand that sometimes aligning our hearts means making the hardest calls, with hands trembling and voices faltering, but never without love. In the weeks that followed my decision, life felt strangely muted. The air in our home thickened with unspoken words and unshed tears, a heavy blanket that wrapped around us as we tried to navigate this new, uncertain space. I kept my distance, mostly retreating to the small room I'd claimed as my sanctuary, where posters of my favorite bands clashed with textbooks filled with dreams I still held tightly. Each night, I would lay there, staring at the ceiling, running my fingers over the hard spine of my college fund savings account, my heart as heavy as it was when I turned my mother down. One evening, she knocked on my door. It was tentative, almost as if she were afraid to disrupt the fragile silence that had fallen between us. "Can I come in?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I hesitated for a moment, unsure whether I wanted to re-enter the conversation. But knowing that we couldn't just let the air sit stagnant, I nodded, pushing the door open wider. She stepped inside, her face drawn and weary, the weight of her financial burdens etched across her brow. "Can we talk?" she said, perching on the edge of my desk, her fingers fidgeting with the hem of her sweater. I could see the flicker of hurt in her eyes, the remnants of our last conversation still haunting her. "I've been thinking about what you said." Her voice trailed off as she glanced around my room, her gaze landing on the faded photographs of happier times, memories that felt almost foreign now. I waited, my heart racing, unsure if I was ready to hear her feelings, or if I even wanted to relive that emotional chaos. It felt as though we were balancing on the precipice. One slip could send us tumbling down into anger or resentment. I don't want you to think that I blame you," she finally continued, the words spilling out like drops of rain in a sudden storm. "I was scared. Scared of losing the only thing that's been constant for me." I felt tears pricking my eyes. "Mom, I didn't mean to make things worse. I have to think about my future too. I know it's selfish but, no," she cut in firmly, a new kind of resolve sparking in her tone. "It's not selfish to want better for yourself. I realize that now. I've been struggling for so long, and I projected it all onto you. I shouldn't have. It's my debt, my choices. And while I would give anything to have my own college fund, I realize now that I can't force you to carry the burden of my mistakes. You deserve to have your path, and I need to find my way through this without dragging you down." The raw honesty in her words washed over me like a bomb. I hadn't expected this, didn't anticipate that our roles might shift in this way. I hadn't realized she hadn't seen me as just her child, but as a vessel to salvage her dreams. We sat there in silence for what felt like hours, letting the weight of our conversation settle between us like a fragile truce. I saw her vulnerability, but I also recognized my own fear mirrored back at me, the fear of failing to live up to the dreams we both held. Maybe we both need to start over, I said quietly, my voice trembling. We can face this together, but not on my shoulders alone. You have to let me pursue what I want. A flicker of hope lit her eyes, and in that moment, something shifted between us. It wasn't just about the money, it was about rebuilding trust, redefining love, and understanding what it meant to stand together while acknowledging the burden each of us had been carrying. It was about recognizing that love can be fierce and protective but also gentle enough to create space for both of us to breathe. Gradually, our conversations began to change, morphing into something more profound than we'd imagined. We talked about her debts honestly, about the job she was thinking of pursuing, about how budgeting wasn't just a punishment but a chance for rebirth. I shared my aspirations too, the things I wanted to study, and the dreams I held tightly inside. With every word, we moved closer back to each other, each moment stitching up the frayed edges of our relationship. As I write this, months later, I can finally acknowledge that I never stopped wondering if I was the asshole. Perhaps I was at one point, but I was also a daughter trying to carve out her own life amid chaos. And isn't that what love asks of us? To hold both our dreams and our loved ones' dreams in the balance, even when it threatens to tear us apart? I still don't have all the answers, but every day feels like a chance to learn, to grow. I'm working on my future while watching my mother fight for hers, an unexpected team navigating the complexities of life with newfound respect. Sometimes, saying no opens the gateway to saying yes, to ourselves, and to the hope of brighter tomorrows. You wouldn't think something as simple as a horse could cause a rift in a family, but here I am, sitting at my kitchen table, staring at the vet bill that's become a symbol of all the chaos. I never imagined that dealing with my two beloved Arabians, Bella and Zeus, would lead to me sending an invoice to my little sister, Liv. It all started when she turned 16 and, in a burst of teenage whimsy, decided she could help me with my horses. It was a sunny Saturday afternoon, the kind that lulls you into a sense of easy comfort, when Liv bounded into the barn, her ponytail bouncing behind her. I was mucking out the stalls, the earthy smell of hay and a hint of manure filling the air, when I heard her excited voice cutting through my thoughts. "Can I bring my friends over to see Bella and Zeus?" she asked, her eyes sparkling with possibility. "Sure," I replied, though I secretly wondered why she thought her friends would care about horses. A couple of hours later, a gaggle of giggling girls squeezed into the barn, each one more enthusiastic than the last. They fed the horses treats, petted them, and eventually, much to my horror, began scheming about breeding. I tried to interject, reminding them all that it wasn't just a game. "Breeding is a big deal, Liv," I said, keeping my tone light but firm. "It's not just about having cute foals." But she brushed me off, somehow convinced it would be a fun adventure. It was a naive, childish thought, and I didn't really think she would pursue anything further. But I should have known better. A few days passed, and one evening, I strolled out to check on Bella and Zeus only to find Liv and her friends unsupervised in the pasture. The horses were separated by a flimsy fence, and Liv stood in the center, hands on her hips, gesturing animatedly. I felt a pit in my stomach as I rushed over. "What on earth are you doing?" I nearly shouted, my heart racing. Liv grinned. "Zeus and Bella are going to have a baby," she declared, her eyes wide with excitement. "I'll let them out together." The realization hit me hard. What if they actually tried to mate? My mind spun with scenarios. Sure, Zeus was gelded, but my sister clearly didn't understand the implications of what she had done. I could feel every muscle in my body tense as I ushered her friends out, grounding myself in the moment, but inside, a storm was brewing. Sure enough, the next morning, Bella had a minor injury from the chaotic encounter. I watched them both for days, my anxiety gnawing at me, before finally taking them to the vet. The bill was astronomical, and as I stared at the figures, I felt my love for my sister turn into frustration. I scrawled an invoice of my own, detailing the unnecessary vet expenses. The hesitation was brutal. Do I really send this to my sister? After a sleepless night and a barrage of self-reflection, I hit send. I thought I'd feel a rush of relief, but instead, dread washed over me. I couldn't shake the feeling that I had crossed a line. When she received it, the silence was deafening. I waited, heart thudding, bracing for the fallout. Liv finally responded with tears, accusing me of being a heartless sister. I felt sick. All I had wanted was to protect my horses and prevent any future mishaps. But in my quest for retribution, I felt I'd maybe soured the bond between us. It took days of barely speaking to each other before we could even sit down and hash it out. We both cried, she apologized for being reckless, and I confessed how much the whole ordeal had shaken me. We came to an understanding, she would look after Bella and Zeus, and I would be more patient. It all felt surreal, almost haunting, how a simple mishap turned a common Saturday into this ping-pong of emotions. I realized that while I might have been justified in my feelings of frustration, I could have handled it with a bit more grace. As I sit here now, sipping a cup of tea, looking out at the pasture, Liv is out there with the horses, brushing them with a focus I hadn't noticed before. Maybe we both learned something, after all. Life with family isn't easy, and it's definitely a balancing act. As for the vet bill, I now simply consider it an investment in understanding each other better, a reminder that family, like horses, might need a bit more guidance to grow. I find myself smiling as I watch Liv, a little focused whirlwind in that wide expanse of green, her tangles of hair whipping around her face in the breeze. It's almost humorous how she can draw those horses into her orbit, they seem to respond to her presence. I remember the chaos of last week, the shock flaring through my entire body when I discovered her near my barn, attempting to corral my stallion, Duke, and my mare, Bella, for what she thought was a matchmaking session. It felt like she was going to be the next horse whisperer, but in reality, she was just an enthusiastic 11-year-old trying to play God, completely oblivious to the risks involved. The whole scene flashed through my mind, Liv's pleading eyes as she assured me it was just a harmless idea. Just because she was my little sister didn't mean I wouldn't worry about the potential damage, physical and emotional, those horses could incur. When the vet bill arrived, I hesitated, anger pulling in my gut. I should have been understanding. After all, horse breeding felt so foreign to Liv, yet she approached it with this wild imagination that I once had, 2 decades ago. But that day, in the midst of my frustrations and my concerns crashing together, my practicality took over. I sent her the bill with a curt message, a small gesture that felt justified in the moment. Later, though, when I saw her face fall as she read my text, a crumbling hurt that matched the weight in my chest, I regretted my approach. The tension between us grew, a lingering small storm in a family that had always prided ourselves on unity. Watching her now, though, I realize how quickly that storm can quiet. Like a big gray cloud dissolving into sunlight. We've both had our moments, haven't we? I suppose family isn't always about being right, it's about learning how to navigate missteps together. As Liv pauses, resting her head against Bella's neck, I see that her love for horses runs deep. She isn't out there to craft experiments but to bond with creatures that can teach us about trust and kindness. And just like that, with every brushstroke, I can feel the tension washing away, moving not only through her but through me. I think about bringing it up, the bill, how I've learned to communicate better, maybe even apologizing for my reaction, but I realize this quiet moment may speak louder than any words. Living with her, sharing these valleys of mistakes and growth, was more rewarding than I'd ever allowed myself to appreciate before. With a deeper resolve in my heart, I decide to keep our dialogue open, to be patient with her and myself as we navigate our own learning curves together. I take another sip of my tea, watching the scene before me, and I find peace in knowing that perhaps that vet bill wasn't just a cost but a bridge that had invited us closer to each other, showing that the things that strain us can also shape us. As I sat there, watching Liv methodically brush each horse with tender strokes, I felt an overwhelming sense of clarity wash over me. The sun kissed the horizon, casting warm hues over the pasture and illuminating the imperfections on our little homestead. Each broken fence post, each patch of wildflowers spilling over the edges reminded me that life itself isn't meant to be immaculate. I took another slow sip of my tea, letting its warmth seep through my fingers. It wasn't just about the vet bill anymore, it was about the lessons we often overlook when wrapped up in our frustrations. Liv might not have understood the intricacies of horse breeding, and I was once that naive too, chasing dreams with little comprehension of the weight they carried. Maybe her audacity came from a place of wonder, in wanting to connect with the horses the same way I did, a desire for closeness that I hadn't acknowledged until now. I remembered how I used to climb onto my childhood pony without a thought, dreaming of galloping free, completely unbothered by the complexities that came as we got older. The image of my little sister, wide-eyed and hopeful, trying to orchestrate her own version of magic between the horses tugged at my heartstrings. I thought of our conversations, the times we'd spoken past each other over petty squabbles. A breath of fresh air settled into my thoughts. Perhaps I had been too harsh, too quick to defend the reputation of my horses rather than embrace the sincerity of her intentions. The realization hit me that I had inadvertently shrouded her curiosity with anger, turning her unassuming questions into something heavy and laden with guilt. Watching her now, I noticed the way her lips curled gently, humming a tuneless song as she brushed. There was a quiet joy to that moment, a reminder of the innocence we often forget in this busy world. As she finished with one horse, she turned, and I caught her eye. For a moment, we exchanged an understanding smile, one that resonated louder than the silent echoes of our past miscommunications. I decided then that the time had come to change the narrative between us. After she finished with the horses, I set my tea down, absorbing the tranquility of the moment, and called out to her. "Hey Liv, wanna help me with the draft horses feed?" I asked, my voice light, inviting. There was a pause, a flicker of uncertainty in her eye, but then she nodded and brushed off her hands as she made her way over, that same spark of determination lighting her features. As we worked side by side, stirring the grains and chatting about the horses' behaviors, I felt the tension ease like a breeze clearing the winter air. It was in those simple exchanges, the laughter we shared while doing something mundane, that I learned how quickly we could bridge gaps with understanding. The vet bill, rather than the anchor weighing us down, had transformed into a compass, guiding us toward forging this newfound bond. Later that evening, as the stars began to twinkle against the twilight sky, I felt a soft warmth in my heart, a sense that we were finally on a journey together rather than as rivals in each other's lives. I wanted to hug her, to tell her how proud I was of her, and though it felt a little lopsided, I resolved to start anew. We were already plotting ways to improve the barn together, talking about equestrian lessons, the projects we could take on, and a possible trip to the local horse show next summer. Who knew Liv's venture into the world of horses could bloom into something so beautiful if only we kept nurturing it with patience and compassion. As I lay in bed that night, the sound of content horses softly neighing in the distance, I realized that family, like a good horse, might need trust, room to breathe, and a little grace. Perhaps the challenge was never about the vet bill at all, but about allowing ourselves the space to learn, grow, and certainly, love unconditionally. "I don't want to drive with you in the car." Those were the exact words that almost escalated into a full-blown meltdown one Saturday morning as my wife, Liz, and I stood in the kitchen, me absently sipping coffee and her packing the picnic basket for our long-anticipated family outing. Just to clarify, I wasn't saying I didn't want her in my life, it was more about the roller coaster of emotions that driving together managed to bring out in both of us. You know how every couple has their things? Ours seemed to be car rides. Every trip somehow transformed into an arena for argument, highlighting all the petty grievances that usually simmered under the surface. Most days, I didn't mind driving her around, but the last few outings played out like a highlight reel of our little squabbles, her getting anxious over how I drove, me getting irritated with her constant directions. Then came that fateful trip to the farmer's market, where a simple misunderstanding led to a shouting match over directions and somehow spiraled into accusations about who cared more about the event. I remember the tension sitting heavy in the air long after we parked, the bustling sounds around us drowned out by that uncomfortable silence lingering between us. So, one morning during breakfast chatter, she casually asked if I would drive to her sister's house that weekend. My heart sank, and I felt those familiar knots tightening in my stomach. The previous outings had left me drained and worn down, and I just snapped. I wasn't proud of it, my tone might have been sharper than I'd intended, but I couldn't help it. The idea of getting into that car with her again filled me with a sense of dread. I explained my feelings, how every drive felt like a trigger for us both, and any simple disagreement quickly escalated into something bigger. Liz's face fell. I could see betrayal mixed in with confusion, and her disappointment hit me like a punch to the gut. "Am I really that unbearable?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. And in that moment, my frustration twisted into guilt. I loved her, how could I make her feel this way? The air felt thick with unspoken words as I tried to articulate my thoughts. I wanted her to understand why I would rather drop her off at the door and let her go in alone rather than endure another trip marred by tension. But all she saw was a husband unwilling to support his wife with something as simple as driving. It felt like we were caught in this cyclical frustration, and my heart ached contemplating our distance. The car ride that day never happened. Instead, I suggested we take separate cars so we could meet there. She reluctantly agreed, but the grumble of her irked annoyance echoed long after she stormed off to get ready. I kept thinking back to that moment, tossing and turning as I questioned whether I had crossed a line or if this was a necessary boundary for my own mental well-being. Days later, I found myself sifting through various Reddit threads, poring over stories that mirrored our dynamics. Surely, I wasn't the first one with a spouse I struggled to share space with during commutes. I even contemplated posting my own version of AITA for refusing to drive if my wife is in the car. But a part of me hesitated. Deep down, I knew Liz cared, and I didn't want to turn our argument into a public spectacle. As I sat there contemplating, it struck me how foolish it seemed to navigate our lives around this one issue. I decided to approach the subject with her again. Maybe I could suggest a little help from a counselor, a group session to learn how to communicate better in those confined spaces. I prepared for another confrontation, but surprisingly, when I brought it up, her response was a sigh of relief, admitting she also felt the struggle but didn't know how to address it without making it worse. It was a small victory, one that reminded me that love is more than just beating around the bush. It sometimes means having those awkward conversations, even when they make your stomach churn. The road ahead may be bumpy, but I have hope that with a little patience and awareness, we can learn to drive together again, both literally and metaphorically. As the weeks rolled by, that small victory began to ripple into the fabric of our everyday life. We found ourselves seated across from one another more often, each conversation occasionally uncomfortable but always honest. The tension I had imagined would linger started to dissipate into something softer, almost like a mirage that fades as you approach it. Still, every time I slipped into the driver's seat with her beside me, my mind flooded with images of our past drives, moments that felt both intimate and painfully stifling. I remembered that one time we drove to the coast, laughing at how close my car came to the edge of the cliffside. I could still hear her shriek mixed with laughter as I swerved to avoid a pothole. In that memory, I felt a bittersweet ache. Those joyous days had fallen prey to an unspoken strain that was hard to articulate. One evening, while we were watching one of those awful reality shows, where people threw drinks at one another over petty arguments, I snuck a glance at her from the corner of my eye. She looked so content, yet a hint of melancholy rested in her gaze. This time I took the plunge. "Do you think we can go on a drive soon?" I asked, somewhat hesitantly. I was greeted with a skeptical arch of her eyebrow, and my heart raced in response. I rushed to clarify, "I mean a short one. Just to the park, with windows down, no destination." She paused, chewing on her lip before nodding slowly, but I could tell there were layers beneath that simple gesture. I could sense that she was weighing her answer against the awkwardness we had been navigating. "Okay, but we have to promise to communicate this time. No silent treatment, all right?" "Deal," I said, relief washing over me. When the day came, sunny and promising, I found myself standing outside the car for what felt like an eternity. She sidled up to me, and for a flicker of a moment, anxiety gnawed at the edges of my excitement. Had we really untangled the threads? Would it snap back to the old ways once we hit the road? With a deep breath, I opened the door for her, trying to fit that old romantic script despite our recent battles. As we drove, my nerves had a friend in the cool breeze flowing through the open windows. I dared to give a sideways glance at her, and to my surprise, she was smiling, a look I hadn't seen in what felt like eons. "I think I actually missed this," she said lightly. The casualness of her voice struck me, wrapping around me like a cozy blanket. There were a few quiet moments where I could feel the air between us change, morphing into something more comfortable than before. Halfway to the park, she turned to me with earnest curiosity and asked, "What was it that made you refuse to drive with me before?" The question hung in the air like a low-hanging mist. I felt trapped, I guess. It'd start as just us driving, and then I'd feel like our conversations were running out of gas. I often felt like I had to suppress my thoughts just to keep things smooth. Like we were always dodging potholes while ignoring the road ahead. She nodded, absorbing my words. That's exactly how I felt too. I was afraid to steer us into any territory that might end up with us arguing in the car, and it made me anxious. I didn't want to face that tension when it was just supposed to be a simple drive. "Why did we let it come to that?" I asked, almost more to myself than her, but she answered, her voice softer now. "Because trying to keep things perfect put pressure on us. We let the unease grow like weeds in a garden." Suddenly, I felt a weight lift, and the path ahead didn't seem so wound up in knots. This drive was no longer steeped in fear, but in reflections of moments we both cherished, nestled in between the unspoken worries. The park was just ahead when she reached for my hand, and I turned to see her looking at me with an openness I hadn't realized I was yearning for. "Let's not keep dodging the bumps anymore," she said, squeezing my hand. "Yeah, let's just drive," I replied, and as we turned into the park, I felt a resurgence of hope fill the cabin. The journey together was far from over, but it felt worth taking. We parked under an oak tree, the sunlight dancing through the branches, flickering between our faces as we looked at each other, perhaps for the first time in a long while, not just as partners sharing the road but as companions rediscovering each other, leaning into the uncertainty with a hopeful spirit. In the weeks that followed, we traded drives for hikes, park picnics, and late-night talks in our living room. Each outing became an act of reclaiming what had been lost, weaving in and out of nurturing our bond. And occasionally, our conversations would dive deep into the past where unspoken grievances lived, and we would laugh at the absurdity of how it took a struggle to glide us back into the comfort of companionship. I think hindsight can sometimes be more liberating than we give it credit for. We may still have our moments of shaky ground ahead, but for now, I know we'd learned something invaluable, the beauty of simply sharing the ride, bumps and all. I found myself smiling more as the days stretched into weeks, the sunlight filtering through our kitchen window in the morning, illuminating the promise of a new day. It felt strange, almost surreal, how conversations that once felt like precarious tightropes transformed into bridges connecting our hearts. One Saturday morning, as we were preparing breakfast, I caught her humming softly to the tune of an old song that echoed through the house. I couldn't help but join in with a slightly off-key harmony, and we both laughed at my attempt. In that moment, it was as if a weight had lifted, and the air between us crackled with a vibrant energy I hadn't felt in a long time. But it wasn't all smooth sailing. There were still remnants of that tension whenever we approached the car. I remember the day we decided to take a drive together to visit the farmer's market, a small outing that was supposed to be relaxing. As I turned the ignition, the engine's growl filled the air, and an unspoken apprehension crawled back into my gut. I caught a brief flicker in her eyes, a hesitant glance towards the dashboard, as if she feared that the journey we were about to take would steer us off course again. I took a deep breath, recalling all the progress we had made, and turned to her. "Ready?" I asked, hoping my voice conveyed more confidence than I felt. She nodded, but I could see the edges of her lips twitching slightly, betraying the unease beneath her composed facade. As we merged onto the road, I felt the familiar squeeze of tension in my chest. The world outside zipped by, green trees blurring into a colorful tapestry, yet it felt like we were suspended in a moment that could tip either way. Halfway through, while we waited at a red light, I started talking about the summer plans, the vacation we had dreamed about, and how excited I was to explore new places with her. Slowly, she unwound, sharing snippets of her thoughts, her laughter beginning to spill into the cabin, easing the weight of past shadows. It was like oil on troubled waters. Our rhythm returned, the easy banter making the ride feel less like a challenge and more like an adventure. Yet, it was only when we parked in the lot, surrounded by laughter and the sweet scent of fresh produce, that it hit me. These outings were not just about conquering our fears but weaving a tapestry of memories, day by day, thread by thread. I watched as she slid out of the car, her face lighting up with joy at the sight of the market stalls. I realized then that this was what it meant to truly reconnect, to embrace the small moments, to not just share the driving but also the laughter that flourished in the little things. As we wandered, hand in hand, between bright displays of fruits and flowers, I felt that perhaps the real treasure was not in trying to eradicate the past but in learning how to navigate it together, combining our strengths. Even moments of silence held a new promise. We had learned to be present with each other, to sit with the stillness without letting it navigate our emotions. Months later, I found myself reflecting, our dynamic had transformed in ways I hadn't expected. Occasionally, we still stumbled into those old patterns, where one of us would retreat or slip into silence, but now we approached those moments with awareness. I'd suggest we take a drive to unwind, ensuring we'd set the tone early, sometimes with a silly playlist or a game to keep the atmosphere buoyant. Each journey felt like a rediscovery, a chance to create new memories that overshadow the shadows of our past. Life isn't always perfect, and maybe it's in the flaws where our story truly breathes, vibrant and imperfectly beautiful. I still don't know what the future holds. Maybe more bumps, more lessons, or perhaps a serenity we haven't yet touched. But as I navigated through this winding road of life with her by my side, I found solace in the thought that we were learning together. And that in itself was worth every hesitant mile we'd faced together. I never thought sharing a house with 3 other people would lead to such a mess of feelings and moral questions, but here we are. I, a 30-year-old graphic designer, moved in with 2 friends and 1 boyfriend who somehow became part of this tight living situation. Let's call them Sarah, Tom, and Lucas. The dynamic worked most of the time, but when Lucas started getting comfy, I felt a shift. I'd catch him lounging on the couch, flicking through channels and eating our snacks. Sure, he was with Sarah, but it was like the boundaries began to blur between friendship and just having a roommate with coupled privileges. A week ago, Lucas asked if he could borrow my car to go to a job interview he'd been prepping for. Now, usually, I wouldn't mind. I want the guy to succeed. But I'd just spent a fortune on car repairs because my last borrower didn't think a simple flat tire needed more than a can of fix-a-flat. I hesitated, feeling the familiar weight of conflict bearing down on me. "Look, I can give you my bike, and it's only a couple of miles to the office," I suggested, trying to be reasonable. He laughed, like I was joking, but my frustration brewed. I didn't think it was fair to risk my car after everything I'd recently put into it. I told him no. The tension in the air was thick as he mulled over my refusal. I could see him processing, disappointment washing over his face, but I held my ground. The day of the interview came, and the moment I stepped out to grab coffee, I saw him pacing in the living room, barely able to contain his anxiety. "Can I at least use the bike?" he asked, desperation creeping into his voice. My stomach churned. I felt guilty, knowing how badly he wanted this job, but deep down, I knew I couldn't let another person risk my livelihood for a short-term solution to a long-standing worry. "I really can't, Lucas," I replied softly, and I could see the energy in the room dim. When he called me hours later to tell me he missed the interview because he couldn't get there without my car, I felt both relief and guilt. Relief that my choice to protect my property had come without troublesome consequences, at least on my end, but guilt because I could practically hear the resignation in his voice. I spent the rest of the day questioning if I was an asshole for prioritizing my car over someone else's future. Should I have been more understanding? As I sat there in a quiet house that night, I realized that life in this house wasn't going to get any clearer, and maybe that was okay. We were all in this nebulous state of budding adulthood, trying to navigate friendships, relationships, and responsibilities. A few days later, Lucas came home and announced he found another interview opportunity, this time without the expectation of using my car. I smiled for him, but it didn't erase the bittersweet taste of how our previous encounter had shaped things. There were a million small choices that made this life complicated, and sometimes, it seemed, the hardest ones were the ones nobody saw. So, maybe I wasn't the asshole. Maybe I just was someone trying to protect what little I had while hoping everyone else found their way in this messy, expectedly chaotic era of life. As the days blurred into weeks, I watched Lucas navigate the hectic world of job hunting, his determination sometimes leaving me in awe. I'd casually ask him how his applications were going while simultaneously trying to not overstep my boundaries as a roommate. He often consulting his girlfriend, Jess, about the roles he was interested in, their excitement filling the apartment whenever he'd get a call for a phone interview. I couldn't blame him, either. They were young, filled with dreams, and yet, the bitterness from our previous encounter still festered in the background of my mind. I kept replaying that day, the heated exchange, the way my resolve had crumbled as I struggled to stand my ground. Was I selfish for wanting to keep my car safe from wear and tear? For wanting to create a buffer between my possessions and the unpredictable chaos of other people's lives? I found myself wrestling with a kind of guilt that felt inexplicably heavy. It wasn't until one late afternoon, after a grueling day at work engulfed in stress, that it all boiled over again. Jess came home in tears, her mascara smudged, voice cracking as she revealed Lucas hadn't gotten the job he'd pinned all his hopes on. It echoed in the hallway, and my heart sank. I could see Jess's heart shattering, and for a moment, I felt a pang of disdain towards myself. What did I even know about other people's struggles? Day after day, I had cautiously guarded my little world, but at what cost? I was a fortress, standing firm against the emotional weathering of others, and yet, here was proof that sometimes that weather could be brutal. I offered my usual platitudes, "I'm sure something else will come up, and it's not the end of the world," while inwardly questioning if I should have been more supportive. Jess, grabbing a handful of napkins and wiping her tears, looked at me like she was inching closer to needing someone to blame. That flicker in her eyes felt unmistakable, a subtle accusation hiding behind the sorrow. I took a deep breath, letting the air fill my lungs as I tried to quell the rising tide of emotions. "I know this is hard, but Lucas gave it his all," I finally said, my heart racing as I dared to speak. Jess nodded, managing a half-hearted smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. After she had left to meet Lucas for a pep talk, I sank into the sofa, feeling the weight of my decisions again. It hit me like a freight train. I had made my choices, but it wasn't Lucas or Jess who'd pushed me into this position. I was stuck in that gray space between self-preservation and the need to support friends. Would I always feel like this? The next couple of days were filled with the gentle reminder of life moving forward, despite my tumultuous thoughts. Lucas stayed mostly quiet after his setback, and I wondered if my reluctance to share my car had carved a distance between us that felt harsh and unyielding. Would things have been different if I'd just let him borrow it? Would he have felt less like he was trying to walk a tightrope? As I wrestled with these thoughts, I finally gathered enough courage one evening. "Hey, Lucas," I said, my voice hesitant as he sat at the dining table sifting through job listings, his brows knitted in concentration. "I've been thinking about the car. If you really need it for the next interview, you can use it." He looked up, surprise mingling with gratitude on his face. "Really? Are you sure?" I nodded, both relieved and terrified, feeling an almost physical ache in my gut. "Yeah, I trust you." After a long, pregnant pause, he smiled, a genuine light sparking in his eyes again. "Thanks. I'll be careful, I promise." And just like that, with a simple act, a layer of tension lifted from the apartment. It was as if we had both taken a step forward, not just him, but me too. We had to navigate this chaotic time together, reminding ourselves that sometimes you have to release control to create space for others. I had to let go of the guilt and the fear that I was doing everything wrong. Life, I realized, was messy and unpredictable, but maybe that's what made it worth living. Moments turned to memories, and sometimes, being a little vulnerable along the way was the best way to build the connections that mattered most. I hoped that this new chapter would see us become more than just tenants sharing a roof. Perhaps we could spark a friendship that stood stronger than the steel and rubber of any car. As Lucas prepared for the interview, I hugged the thought of growth tightly, and for the first time in a while, I felt a flicker of optimism about navigating this messy era that stretched before us. A week passed, and the tension in our apartment began to dissolve like mist in the morning sun. Lucas was more upbeat, a bounce in his step that I hadn't seen before. He'd opened up about his experiences in getting to know the companies he was applying to, the kind of exciting roles he envisioned for himself, and I found myself rooting for him, hoping he would land something that truly excited him. There was an early morning when we found ourselves sharing coffee in our mismatched mugs, his chipped blue one, a gift from his mom, and my plain white one. We laughed about the terrible dinners we'd relied on during our school days, the microwavable mac and cheese that tasted like cardboard, and the countless times we learned that cooking was a science best left to someone else. "I seriously thought I'd never get through that phase without burning myself," he chuckled, leaning back in his chair as the sunlight streamed through our tiny kitchen window. And just like that, we were trading stories, our laughter bouncing off the walls where silence had lingered too long. It was refreshing, and I thought to myself, this is how you build friendships, brick by brick, shared moments by shared moments. Then the call came. I was in my room, trying to focus on laundry when Lucas burst through my door, an energy that surged through him so contagious I couldn't help but grin. "I got it," he exclaimed, holding his phone triumphantly aloft like a victory flag. My heart swelled as I registered the joy in his eyes. He was excited about starting this new chapter, and by extension, so was I. There was something undeniably uplifting about watching someone else chase their dreams. But as he filled the space around us with excitement, I felt an all too familiar wave of doubt wash over me. I wondered if I had done enough to support him. Should I have lent him my car despite my hesitations? What if he had shown me just a bit more appreciation? I was conflicted. Supporting your friends feels like a slippery slope sometimes, and I had been trying so hard to put myself first. Later that evening, I sat alone on our balcony, staring at the city lights that twinkled like stars against the velvet night sky. The scent of freshly brewed coffee wafted through the open door while the hum of laughter faintly echoed from inside. Lucas was celebrating with our other roommate, Maria, who had baked a cake for the occasion, chocolate, of course, his favorite. As I listened to their joyous banter, I felt a pang of loneliness creep in. The moment felt profound, a celebration of dreams met with the bittersweet taste of my own insecurities. "I'm here, you know," I murmured to the night, unsure of who I was addressing. Would saying it out loud somehow reaffirm my worth, reclaim my decision? But another part of me echoed the doubts. Would I always prioritize my needs over his? Maybe there was a balance to be found, a compromise that allowed both of us to thrive without sacrificing our own boundaries. That night, after the cake was devoured and the laughter subsided, I finally gathered the courage to open up during one of our late-night talks. "Hey, Lucas," I started carefully, "I'm really proud of you for nailing that interview. But can I be honest?" He leaned in, curious. "I still wonder about that day. I know I seemed like a jerk for not letting you use my car, and I just want you to know. It was hard for me to say no." I watched as his expression shifted from surprise to understanding. I get it. It was a tough situation for both of us. You were looking out for yourself, and that's okay. We've all got our own battles, right? That simple statement illuminated something vital. Self-advocacy was not only allowed but also necessary in a world where everyone tried to balance their dreams against the pressures life handed them. I smiled, a warm surge of relief washing over me. My heart felt lighter, and in that moment, the notion of friendship began to reshape. From roommates to allies, navigating an uncertain world together felt less daunting now. Maybe this chapter would take time to unfold completely, and maybe the past would echo, but beneath it all, we were learning. Not just about each other but about ourselves, about accountability, support, and the nuances of trust. It was an ongoing journey, and while I couldn't predict where it would lead us, this felt like the beginning of something beautiful. So, I took a breath, let the hope settle in, and thought maybe, just maybe, we all could find our way, one step at a time. When my 15-year-old daughter, Ava, first came to me with that furrowed brow and almost conspiratorial tone, I knew this wasn't going to be a typical "can we order pizza for dinner" conversation. She was scrolling through her phone, tapping the screen as if the device held the answers to life's most pressing questions. "Mom, you remember Karen from school? The one with the weird lunchbox obsession?" I chuckled, that visual of Karen's floral patterned lunch pail making me smile. "Of course. What about her?" Ava bit her lip, glancing sideways as if she feared someone might overhear us. I took a seat next to her on the couch, concerned but trying to maintain an air of casual curiosity. "Well, she said her mom gets into their group chat and reads everything they talk about. Is that normal?" The question landed with a weight I hadn't expected. I felt a rush of emotions: protectiveness, confusion, indignation. "That doesn't seem right, sweetie," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. Ava's eyes sparkled with relief, but I could see the worry churning behind them. "Do you really think it's weird?" she pressed, and I knew she was grappling with her allegiance to a friend versus her instinct to be kind. "I mean, if these girls can't even speak freely in their own chat, what's the point?" I gestured vaguely, struggling to put my thoughts into words. "I get that parents want to protect their kids, but reading their conversations? That feels invasive." Ava nodded, her shoulders relaxing a bit, but doubt lingered in her gaze. The more we talked, the more I could sense the bond between Ava and her friends was rooted in trust, something that this other mom was potentially undermining. We spent the afternoon discussing the nuances of friendships and boundaries, each point of conversation fueling my desire to protect my daughter while also helping her navigate this new social landscape. Yet, things grew tense when I decided to express my thoughts to Ava about how I felt Karen's mom was crossing a line. What if Mrs. Thompson finds something embarrassing? Or uses it against them later? I said, the words swallowing the air between us. But just then, Ava's face twisted into one of apprehension, and she said something that made my heart clench. "But what if she's just trying to be safe, Mom?" I could feel the pendulum of my parenting philosophy swinging. Was I being too harsh? Too aggressive in my stance against someone who might actually be trying to look out for her daughter? As our discussion continued, a nagging voice in the back of my head whispered that I might be a bit too protective, but deep down, I just couldn't shake the feeling that the trust between girls was being eroded by that thin screen of parental oversight. My heart was worn from this emotional tug-of-war, balancing between supporting comfort and advocating for separation. In the coming weeks, Ava decided to share her thoughts with Karen, but that confrontation didn't end well. I could see the stress gnawing at my daughter, somewhere between the line she wanted to walk as a good friend and the line I thought was essential to take as a protector. When their friendship seemed to wane, with Karen taking it to a new level of loyalty to her mom, Ava became frustrated and hurt, returning to me with her eyes brimming with unshed tears. I hugged her, rubbing her back softly, forcing myself to set aside my anxiety about Karen's home life. "You're not responsible for their choices," I said. "But you can always choose to do what feels right for you." Slowly, I watched as she emerged from that cocoon of unease, taking ownership of her feelings and distancing herself from the unhealthy dynamics. Then I grew even more bewildered when Mrs. Thompson texted me a week later. I could almost hear the smugness radiating through her words as she asked if I would like to talk about our daughter's friendship. I took a moment to breathe, staring at the text on my phone, heart racing as I contemplated what sort of conversation was about to ensue. And as I teetered at the edge of familiarity and unease, I felt that surge of protective energy rise, breeding uncertainty in my own thoughts. As the days unfolded, I eventually responded, but could not shake the thought of how easily the world of social media can turn even the simplest of friendships into a battleground for trust and loyalty, wondering if everything we once cherished about growing up together was now battered by screens. I'm still pondering that lunchbox scenario and how, in a world where connection should build kids up, it sometimes seems to cripple them with distrust, leaving me caught between the expectations of a good friend and a watchful mother. Maybe I'm justified in thinking the mom is overstepping, or perhaps I'm simply going to be judged as the overprotective parent. Who really knows? But there's one thing I've learned: navigating the painful waters of adolescence is no easy feat, and daughters need to feel heard, not just as children in my eyes, but as young women finding their place in a complicated world. I took a deep breath, the scent of fresh cut grass wafting through the open kitchen window, a stark contrast to the swirling thoughts in my mind. I watched my daughter, Lily, sitting on the living room floor, surrounded by her colorful art supplies, her brow furrowed as she painstakingly crafted something out of paper and glue. Every piece she created was a glimpse into her inner world, and I feared that whatever she sensed about her friend's mom might dim that vibrant spark if she felt I wasn't on her side. "Mom?" Lily's voice broke through my reverie, startling me back into the moment. "Can we take a break? I'm feeling sort of weird." There it was again, that word. I set down my coffee and sat beside her, the warmth of her small frame pressing against me. "Weird like what?" I asked gently, trying to mask my own unease. "Weird like, how can Mrs. Thompson see what I'm saying too? Julia?" She didn't meet my eyes, clearly wrestling with the heavy thoughts behind her youthful gaze. "It's like, it's not just happens, you know? Like, I feel like I can't say, like, anything without her reading it. It's just weird." I felt a pang of protectiveness and pride wash over me at her articulation. It was one of those moments where you realize your child is becoming more than just your little girl. She's a thinker, a person shaped by her experiences. "You're not crazy for feeling that way, Lily," I said softly, brushing a loose strand of hair behind her ear. "It's okay to want privacy. It's okay to think it's weird." But even as the words left my mouth, a flicker of doubt ignited within me. Was I feeding into something that might later just amplify her insecurities? "What if your friend's mom just wants to keep her safe?" I asked, trying to present both sides, but I could hear the hesitation in my own tone. "That doesn't mean she can't trust us," Lily replied assertively, her eyes finally locking onto mine. "It feels like she thinks we're kids who can't handle stuff ourselves." There it was, the essence of her turmoil, a tangle of trust and reliance on friendship that felt too heavy for her small shoulders. I could sense the confusion radiating from her, and it twisted my stomach like a pretzel. I remembered how I'd always felt like I had to earn my independence from my own parents, how every safety net often felt like a straitjacket. But did that make me the bad guy if I stood firm in supporting her feelings? "Do you want to talk to her?" I offered, though fear crept in, imagining how that conversation would unfold. "Like, get her to tell Mrs. Thompson that she's weirded out?" I finished for her, smiling despite the tension. "Yeah, kinda." The laughter vanished as quickly as it had arrived, and uncertainty took its place. "Maybe we should talk, just the two of us," I suggested lightly. "Let's figure this out together." A determined look crossed Lily's face, her little chin jutting out in a way that reminded me far too much of myself. We dove into a conversation about boundaries, respect, and what it meant to communicate with support instead of judgment. It was refreshing and occasionally painful as the truth emerged. I realized that while I feared the overstepping of others, I also needed to make sure that I didn't suffocate her with my instinctual desire to shield her from everything. Together, we navigated it all, her comfort with what she wanted to say to Julia, a response that felt empowering, that reinforced her independence while still letting her know I had her back. After a few fidgety moments of brainstorming, she finally scribbled something down. "Hey, I feel funny about Mrs. Thompson reading our chats. Can you just ask her?" Just then, a certain sense of ease washed over me. The hard discussions create better dialogue, spacing in the struggle of raising a child who will someday be an adult. It wasn't perfect, but it felt right to let her lead the conversation when it came to matters so close to her heart. In the days that followed, I kept an eye on Lily during her interactions with Julia, hoping she would find the strength to voice her feelings. I learned that sometimes being a support means just standing back and watching, trusting that she would figure out her path, confident as she spreads her wings. Then, one afternoon, after feedback from Julia that seemed to empower her, Lily bounded into the house with a beaming smile. "You know what? We talked to Mrs. Thompson," she said, nearly jumping with pride. "And guess what? She apologized and said she didn't mean to make us uncomfortable. We can friend chat without her snooping. I felt a flood of relief crashing through me at her words, but somewhere, beneath that joy, I was fully aware that this wouldn't be the last battle she faced. This journey was just beginning, one filled with hurdles, lessons, and maybe some minor catastrophes along the way. But if she could open herself to conversation, if I could help her learn to navigate her emotions, then maybe we both would come out stronger on the other side. And in this tangled, beautiful mess of adolescence, perhaps I wouldn't be the antagonist, just another parent, doing my best, together. That afternoon, I sat at the kitchen table, the open window letting in a gentle breeze, carrying with it the scent of blooming lilacs from our backyard. My daughter, Mia, was busily assembling her homework, papers strewn across the table, colored pens creating a small rainbow of doodles surrounding an unfinished math worksheet. I watched her work, occasionally glancing up at her with a sense of pride mixed with the lingering worry that had settled like a stone in my stomach. I had fought back tears earlier when she had finally opened up about her friend Sophia's mom and her invasive messages, but seeing Mia engrossed in her assignments now made me realize just how vital these moments of trust and connection were. "Hey, Mia," I finally said softly, shifting the dynamics in our busy little space. "You know I'm always here to talk, right?" She looked up, her eyes focused and clear, even if the small furrow in her brow suggested she was still digesting our earlier conversation. "Yeah, I know," she replied, her voice a little tentative. "But I don't want to be that kid whose mom is always breathing down her neck." There it was, her adolescent anxiety surfacing again, and just like that, layers of complexity deepened my understanding of her world. I took a breath, letting my words flow out with as much clarity and kindness as I could muster. "I get that. I don't want to be that parent either. The world's big and a little scary sometimes. We need each other's backs more than ever now." She nodded slowly, absorbing my words. Then her focus shifted to her phone on the table, a faint shadow crossing her forehead. "But my friends think I'm a freak for thinking it's weird that Sophia's mom goes through our chats. It feels like, I don't know. It's like no one cares about boundaries." The ache in my heart twinged again, knowing how peer pressure can sometimes loom larger than any parent's voice. "Well, boundaries matter, sweetheart. They help define us. It's okay to feel unsettled about it. It just feels so unfair." Her voice cracked slightly, revealing an unexpected emotional vulnerability. "Like, how do I say something without sounding ungrateful? I don't want to hurt anyone's feelings." We were treading on complex ground, this landscape of friendship mixed with loyalty, respect, and the innocent desire for connection. I remembered my own childhood, the swirl of emotions, confusion stemming from wanting to fit in, yet feeling lost in the process. You know, sometimes it's hard. Standing up for yourself can feel lonely, and that's okay. But your feelings are real, and they deserve to be expressed. The sincerity in my voice seemed to spark something in her. Mia began to speak, her chatter weaving in and out like the gentle breeze outside, filled with vibrant stories about her friends, about school, and how complicated it felt when everyone had opinions about everything. As she spoke, I saw her world slowly transform into colors, imagery that reflected what her heart had been silently wrestling with all along. After a while, I set the dishes aside, and we fell into a comfortable silence, the kind that felt shared rather than empty. It was then that the reality of our conversation resurfaced. "Do you think I should talk to Sophia directly about it?" she asked, her voice betraying an uncertain hope. I let the question hang for a moment, nudging aside my protective instincts. "Only if you feel ready, Mia. Approach it with honesty. You're not trying to hurt her, it's your boundary. And if she respects you, it'll strengthen your friendship." That small ember of reassurance lit up her expression, and I could almost see the gears quietly turning in her mind, testing this new approach. Just as I was about to say something further, my phone buzzed on the table, pulling me back to reality. It was a message from Mia's school about their upcoming social studies project. "Right when you're finding your voice," I mused aloud, "more chaos. Isn't that always the way?" She laughed, the kind of chain reaction laughter that felt like a release. "Welcome to my life." As I watched her dive back into her assignments, I felt waves of optimism crashing against the rocks of that fear I had been grappling with. Perhaps it was silly to think that every conversation would solve every problem. But we were in this together, just a pair of players in the chaotic game of life, navigating through the highs and lows. The world was indeed filled with hurdles, but as long as we kept talking, even when fear made it hard, I knew we'd emerge okay, together, every step of the way. Over the days and weeks that followed, Mia did muster the courage to approach Sophia, and while it wasn't perfect, it opened avenues for dialogue that surprised both of them. I felt some weight ease off my shoulders as I realized, this journey of parenting isn't about perfection, it's about presence, being there for each other as we navigate life together. And maybe, just maybe, my voice wouldn't be an impediment, it would be the bridge through the messiness of growing up. I remember the night my partner, Alex, casually dropped a bombshell on me over dinner. We were sitting at our little wooden table, the kind that wobbles unless you balance it just right with a stack of magazines. The room was filled with the rich scent of garlic and rosemary. I just whipped up a hearty risotto, something I often made because cooking grounded me, gave me joy. In between bites, Alex looked at me with that look, intense and a bit nervous. So, I was thinking, how about we get you a new kitchen setup? Like, a really fancy one. Maybe even a new stove? My heart sank a bit. Thanks, but I love my current setup, I replied, trying not to sound dismissive. Alex's face fell. But I looked at induction cooktops, and this one has all these features that could really enhance your cooking. They launched into a whole spiel about the latest technology, how it could change the game for me. But what Alex didn't get was that I didn't want a shiny, expensive appliance that would take away the imperfect charm of my cooking space. I'd spent years cultivating my skills in that kitchen, and it represented more than just cookware, it was a haven. The thought of taking a gift worth over $1,000 felt like I was admitting my love for cooking wasn't genuine unless it came with a hefty price tag. It's too much, Alex. Honestly, it feels ungrateful to accept that. I like cooking as it is. I don't need a fancy setup to validate me. The silence that hung between us thickened with tension, and I could see the disappointment in their eyes. My words landed hard. I felt bad for not embracing the gift, for not wanting to let a beautiful gesture in. But part of me felt like accepting it would twist the very essence of why I loved cooking. Over the next few days, I reflected on our conversation and weighed my feelings. I knew I had to talk to Alex again. Perhaps it would have made sense if I had explained to them how I derived my motivation from the little experiences, the imperfect meals I'd crafted, the burnt garlic that reminded me of my childhood mistakes. But instead, I let fear over the value of the gift consume me, and I left it untouched on the back burner, simmering in the awkwardness. I finally sat down with Alex again, who seemed torn. They were trying to understand my reasoning while also feeling hurt by my refusal. It was tense, like standing on fragile ice, unsure of where to step next. Look, I appreciate you wanting to support my passion, but I don't want that to be tied to money. Cooking is my artistry, my therapy. Making something from scratch is worth more than any gadget. As I spoke, I felt my heart race. I could see the wheels turning in Alex's mind, and in that moment, I realized I wasn't just quelling a conflict, I was shedding light on what truly mattered to both of us. We began to discuss the deeper layers of creativity and passion in our lives, how they manifest differently in both of us. I saw Alex's expression soften, and I caught the corners of their mouth lifting ever so slightly. While we may have had different views on value and love, I knew we cared deeply for one another, and that was a gift far more precious than any appliance could ever be. I can't say it all wrapped up neatly. There's still some lingering tension around the topic, but for now, we're finding our rhythm again, and that feels like progress. Sometimes, the way you show love and the way it's received can be as complicated as any recipe. And maybe that's okay. As I settled into my chair at the kitchen table, surrounded by scents of rosemary and garlic from the roast I had left to marinate, I reflected on the strange tension that had emerged between Alex and me. Just the other day, I had found myself engrossed in my latest culinary adventure, chopping vegetables with a fierce determination, but the whole time, a cloud of unease loomed over my head. Here was my beloved partner, an amazing cook in their own right, wanting to express their love through the gift of a state-of-the-art mixer, and yet I found myself feeling boxed in rather than uplifted. "You don't trust me to create," I had said that afternoon, the words spilling out before I could catch them. I could almost see the confusion glaze over Alex's face. "It's not that at all," they replied softly, and I felt the truth in their voice, but the initial sting of their well-intentioned gift stuck with me like burnt sugar. I loved cooking, so much that I thrived on the messiness and improvisation it brought into my life. To me, cooking wasn't just about whipping up something delicious, it was a dance, an expression of my personality, and a way to weave my love for those I cared about into something tangible. But accepting that glimmering appliance felt like accepting that I couldn't do it in my own way anymore. Now, as I swept my eyes around our modest kitchen, I realized that all those mismatched utensils and pots, the faint scars on the wooden cutting board, each a small testimony to some culinary experimentation gone wrong, were more valuable to me than any countertop marvel. The lingering tension with Alex persisted in the most unexpected ways. It surfaced during our shared moments, like when I tried to chop herbs as we talked about our week. "You know, that mixer could save you time," Alex quipped, the light tone of their voice masking the seriousness I was sensing behind it. I paused, knife hovering mid-air, and turned my gaze to their face, looking for the irritation I half expected to see. Instead, they wore a soft smile, and a hint of vulnerability crept into their eyes that made my heart ache. There was love in that smile, maybe even a quiet plea for understanding. For a moment, I felt as if I stood in front of a fire that could either warm my heart or burn me entirely. I inhaled slowly, letting the fragrant air fill my lungs, and I finally asked, "But do you get it? It's not about the time, I don't need time saved. I need to feel the process, the rawness of it." And in that moment, something shifted. Alex leaned forward, resting their arms on the table, brow furrowing as they considered my words. "I think I get it," they said gently, searching for the right way to phrase what I had just shared. "Then, how do I show you love if what I thought was helpful isn't? What can I do?" I had never thought of that before. How could I guide them when I barely understood myself? It was the questions that hung heavy in the air, shaping not just that moment but the very fabric of our relationship. And while I didn't know that we would ever completely eliminate the misunderstandings that had taken root in our exchanges, I did feel a small flicker of hope. Perhaps love was less about grand gestures and more about the small conversations, the understanding that these little bumps weren't the end of the road, it was merely another twist in our ever-evolving recipe. After we finished cooking together, despite it taking longer than usual, we sat down to feast on my latest creation, and the tension began to ease. The flavors of what I made harmonized with quiet laughter as we reminisced about the silly moments we had shared along this journey. And just like that, our relationship began to simmer back to life, no grand mixer necessary. Later that night, as I washed the dishes, I found myself smiling at the reflective gleam of the stainless steel mixer on the counter, knowing it might eventually make its way into our kitchen, albeit on our terms. I realized that maybe it represented more than just a gadget. It was an opportunity for Alex to find creative freedom in their cooking, a chance for us to bond over something different. Perhaps love didn't always mean complete agreement but rather embracing our differences and weaving them into something new. I turned to Alex, who was lounging on the couch, and just like that, I felt the warmth return to the space between us. "Let's figure out ways we can cook together. I want our kitchen to feel like a partnership," I suggested. The corners of their mouth lifted into that familiar soft smile once again, and this time my heart felt lighter. I realized that maybe we didn't need to have all the answers, but we were on a journey together, and that was enough for now. The next few weeks unfolded like a delicate soufflé, full of promise but requiring patience and finesse. We started small, diving into recipes that felt attainable but had just enough challenge to keep us engaged. Saturday evenings became our little ritual. We'd pull out step-by-step cookbooks, the kind that have more pictures than words. I relished the moments when I would show Alex my favorite method of chopping an onion, explaining how to get the perfect dice while trying to refrain from getting too lost in a teaching mode. Alex, in turn, introduced me to their favorite marinades, sweet and tangy concoctions that I had never considered before. It was like we were two artists experimenting with fresh colors on a canvas, each stroke adding new texture to our relationship. But it wasn't always smooth sailing. I'd catch myself slipping into my old habits, where pride reared its head and I'd insist on doing everything myself, convinced that asking for help made me weak. One night, while stirring a bubbling marinara sauce, I felt the pull in my stomach, an urge to handle everything from prep to cleanup just to prove my prowess. Alex leaned against the kitchen counter, arms crossed, watching me with those knowing eyes. "It doesn't have to be perfect, you know. It should just be fun," they said gently, and I felt a flush of defensiveness rise within me. Yet, just like with any dish that requires adjusting ingredients based on taste, I took a breath and swallowed my pride. "You're right," I admitted, setting the wooden spoon down. "Can you help me chop some garlic?" The light chuckle that escaped their lips was like music to my ears, dispelling the tension in the air. Together, we found a rhythm, hands moving in tandem, and I began to understand that making a meal wasn't solely about the end result, but rather the joy of the moment spent creating something together. As the aroma of our cooking filled the apartment, I noticed how laughter became a constant ingredient in our culinary experiment. We had our mishaps, a splatter of tomato sauce here, an overcooked piece of chicken there, but each blunder became a shared joke, a story to retell. One night, While we were wrestling with a particularly ambitious homemade pizza, it dawned on me how much closer we had grown through these shared experiences. With every flourish of fresh basil and sprinkle of cheese, our kitchen echoed with the laughter and chatter of two people who were no longer simply living under one roof but were beginning to build something warm together. Days turned into weeks, and slowly but surely, the kitchen transformed. It began holding memories, not just for Alex and me, but as a testament to our evolving partnership. And though I still had moments where I felt trepidation about expressing my thoughts, I learned it was okay to be vulnerable. One evening, as we sipped wine after another cooking session, I turned to Alex and shared my fears about not being enough. "What if I'm just not good at this?" I whispered, voice barely above a murmur. Alex paused, their gaze steady and unwavering. "Don't you see? You're more than the perfect recipe. You bring so much heart to what we do. We'll figure this out, together." That night, I curled up next to Alex on the couch, wrapped in the warmth of our connection, and, for the first time in weeks, I felt like I was breathing easier. The lingering tension didn't vanish completely, it lurked like a shadow, a reminder of how different our perspectives could be. Still, we were learning how to appreciate those differences without letting them create distance. As I knocked my head back and laughed at some foolish joke we shared, it hit me, this wasn't merely about cooking or gifts but rather the exploration of what it really meant to love someone and accept their love in return. In those late-night talks after dinner, we began weaving dreams together, sharing thoughts of a small garden outside, bursting with fresh herbs to elevate our meals. I think, perhaps, we were planting the seeds of not just a garden but a life we both envisioned. And even if it wasn't perfect, maybe love, like cooking, was more about discovery, learning, and savoring every moment, a beautiful mess that somehow always managed to nourish the soul.